Morning, everyone. Gandang umaga po. Uh, we're obviously waiting for a few more people to join us, so we'll start promptly in 10 minutes. Morning, everyone. Magandang umaga po sa lahat. Let's take our respective seats. This hearing is now called to order. And let me acknowledge the presence of Senator Risa Hontiveros. Morning. With that, let me direct the committee secretary to acknowledge our resource persons for this morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. I would like to acknowledge our guests and resource persons for today's public hearing. From the Department of Energy, Secretary Alfonso Cusi. From the National Grid Corporation of the Philippines, Attorney Ronald Dilan Concepcion and Engineer Erwil Bagawisan. From the National Transmission Corporation, Attorney Melvin Matibag. And we also have from the National Grid Corporation of the Philippines, the President, Mr. Anthony Almeda. And from the National Transmission Corporation, Attorney Melvin Matibag and Professor Rualdo Del Mundo. From the Department of National Defense, Lieutenant Colonel Richard Agoho. From the National Security Council, General Hermogenes Esperon Jr. with Maria Victoria Castro, Assistant Director General, and Major Carlos Eli Dingson. From the Power Sector Assets and Liabilities Management Corporation, PISAM, Ms. Irene Besido Garcia, President and CEO. From the Energy Regulatory Commission, Attorney Agnes Divanadera and Engineer Ligario Galang Jr. From the National Power Corporation, Mr. Pio Benavides. From the Philippine Electricity Market Corporation, Attorney Oscar Ala, Mr. Rauf Tan. From the Independent Electricity Market Operator, IMOP, Attorney Richard Nethercott, and Mr. Engineer Robin Descanso. From the Bureau of Immigration, Attorney Tobias Javier. From the Professional Regulation Commission, Engineer Francis Mapile and Engineer Enrico Claro Del Moro. From the Institute of Integrated Electrical Engineers of the Philippines, Engineer Rodrigo Pecolera. From the Securities and Exchange Commission, Attorney Darwin Soto. From Citizen Watch Philippines, Mr. Orlando Oxales. And from Laban Consumer, Mr. Roger Avenido. And we also have from Attorney Condes from the Philippine Competition Commission. And from the ICT as ASEC Emmanuel Ray Kaintik. Everyone has been acknowledged, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, ComSec. Again, thank you very much for joining us in this hearing. And let me personally acknowledge again the presence of General Esperon and Secretary Cusi. Thank you very much for your time. I know you're very busy with a lot of things on hand. But maraming salamat po sa inyong presensya. Today we'll be talking four issues that were referred to this committee and to this subcommittee. The privileged speech of Senator Hontiveros, which was delivered on December 9, 2019, was primarily referred to this committee, the Committee on Energy, and three resolutions, Senate Resolutions 219, authored by yours truly, Senate Resolution 223, authored by Senator Hontiveros and Senator De Lima, and Senate Resolution 227, again authored by yours truly, were all referred to the Committee on Public Services, which is chaired by Senator Grace Poe. Senator Grace Poe has graciously created a subcommittee to handle these three resolutions, and this subcommittee was assigned to, again, yours truly, to chair. So today we'll be concurrently hearing the privilege speech and the three resolutions concurrently by two committees, which is the Committee on Energy and the subcommittee created by the Committee on Public Services. So that is the setup for today. The privilege speech and the three resolutions actually have a lot of topics on hand, but I would like to divide the topics into three very important um, objectives that we will be discussing. Number one, national security. That's the first topic. Number two, the concession agreement and the franchise that was issued in 2008, its compliance to those two documents. And number three, the performance of NGCP as required by government. Today we'll be focusing on national security aspect. And if we have time later on, we can go into the two other aspects. But again, we would like to focus on the national security aspect. We would like to take advantage of the presence of General Esperon, who is the chief of our National Security Council. He is the National Security Advisor, no, of the National Security Council. With that, we will now proceed into the national security aspect of the three resolutions and the privilege speech. And I would like to open with a very basic questions, no? Very basic question addressed to General Esperon and also to Secretary Cusi. And my question is there any danger or any threat to national security insofar as our national transmission grid is concerned? No? Meron bang banta sa ating seguridad? Meron bang banta sa pambansang seguridad ng ating bansa pagdating sa national transmission grid? And this is actually a lingering question in many of the legislatures. And I want to answer that basic question during the course of this hearing. With that, I would like to hear any opening speech from Center. Okay, we can go proceed to the hearing proper. Again, I'd like to open up the hearing with the simple question of, is there any threat to our national security insofar as the transmission grid is concerned? And I'd like to direct that question to General Esperon. General, you can proceed with your briefing. And during the course of the hearing, please focus on that very basic question. No? Because from a layman point of view, yun naman po ang pinakamahalaga kung mayroong banta sa ating seguridad pagdating sa transmission grid ho natin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Senator Gatchalian, the Senator Hontiveros, the other members of the committee. Good morning. We are glad to join the committee in its inquiry into the power grid as expressed in privilege speeches and the various resolutions 219, 223, and 227, which all aim to closely look into the ownership, management, and operations of the National Grid Corporation of the Philippines. By way of assisting this committee, I would like to cite some parameters by which we can make a sober assessment of whether the current situation of the NGCP has adverse implications to Philippine national security. To my view as the National Security Advisor, the core issue at hand is the country's energy security. To us, energy security means the sources of energy are uninterrupted, secured, and protected. Number two, there is efficient delivery of electricity from these sources to all households and economic sectors throughout the country. Number three, the energy sources are sustainably developed and electricity is affordable. The NGCP is a major player in energy security because it is in charge of the operation and management of the transmission or the national grid. In fact, we consider it as a national critical infrastructure. It is very essential to the proper functioning of our society and economy, and it is vital to the survivability of our nation. The question, therefore, is whether the NGCP's operations of the national grid directly and indirectly result to the achievement of any of these four characteristics of energy security and ultimately our nation's security. May I emphasize that there are four energy security elements that we are looking at, and one of these is the security of the structure itself. All the others are, of course, the domain of other departments. And so we are prepared what we have done is we are prepared to actually present a briefing, but I would say it would be better appreciated if we will do it in an executive session, if that will be approved by the committee chair and the members, because there are technical matters that we cannot as yet tell not really to the public, but to some parties that may be so interested in the workings of the NGCP, both hostile as well as friendly. But I must say that on the basic question, is there any danger to any threat insofar as the national transmission grid is concerned? There are. But I would caution immediately against being in panic about it, because there are also measures that we can adapt to allow NGCP, as it is doing now, to continue operations. And our briefing will contain such actions and measures that we may adopt. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, before at the proper time, the Chair rules on the advice of General Esperon, I do have questions on that matter of national security. So if the Chair will eventually rule in the affirmative, I will just put those questions in broad strokes on the record para rin alam ng publiko natin kung ano mga tanong ang i-raise ng komite natin kay General Esperon, even if in executive session. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Hontiveros. I do acknowledge that due to the sensitivity of this topic and due to the sensitivity of this infrastructure, we need to conduct an executive session with the Department of Energy and also with the National Security Council to discuss more in-depth possible or existing vulnerabilities of this infrastructure. It's very difficult, and I don't think it's also appropriate to broadcast to everyone this type of vulnerabilities. And today we will just discuss broad strokes. I think what we want to also achieve at the end of this session is to acknowledge what are the gaps that government need to address and how to move forward. I think we should also acknowledge that in these aspects of national security, it's not only we cannot only focus on the executive side, but the legislature should also do its part, and also the public, and should do its part to assure that national security is always paramount in our everyday agenda. With that, would like to, yes, we will concur with the National Security Advisor to conduct an executive session.
But Mr. Chair, just before the Chair rules to move into executive session, there are a few other questions na gusto ko sanang itanong. I do have about 5 pages of questions for General Esperon tungkol sa national security na detalyado kong itatanong in executive session as the Chair seems to be about ready to rule. Pero before those, Mr. Chair, I also have a fewer number of questions, pero gusto ko na rin i-place on the record regarding yung magiging second agenda ng komite natin, Mr. Chair, on the concession agreement and the performance of NGCP. Nitong nakaraang mga linggo kasi I've received more questions, also more information, including po sa mga civil society organizations. There are CSOs at saka mga labor unions na interesado din sa tanong na ito. So if the Chair will allow me, just kumbaga rapid fire lang ng mga tanong, there are about 17, pero simpleng yes or no lang naman ang kailangang sagot. Simpleng response in terms of a statement of fact. So again, on the financials of our hearing, perhaps I could ask this of the NGCP. Is it accurate to say that among others, so yes or no lang po, is it accurate to say that the operation and management of the transition grid was auctioned off to NGCP to earn more money to pay off the debts of the National Power Corporation? Would it be Mr. Almeda, Mr. Chair, to reply, or would it be another one from NGCP?
Yes, the President and CEO of NGCP is here, and would like to also put on record my appreciation for his presence.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So is it accurate to say that the operation and management of the transition grid was auctioned off to NGCP to earn more money to pay off the debts of the National Power Corporation?
Good morning, Senator Hontiveros and Senator Gatchalian. No, ma'am.
No, thank you, Mr. Chair. Asking Transco now, so mabilis lang. Before the NGCP took over, Transco was able to earn an average of 20.7 billion pesos annually from operating the transmission grid. Is this correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Back to NGCP now, on the average, how much does government receive from NGCP annually by way of concession fees?
14 to 15 billion pesos on taxes and concession fees.
14 to 15 billion pesos. When we continue the hearing, Mr. Chair, I will follow that up kasi ang data ko po ay yung by way of concession fees, government receives from NGCP annually only 6.75 billion pesos. So less than half po of the response. So doing the math, presuming na tama yung figure ko, no, na 6.75 billion pesos, doing the math, would it be fair to say that government has lost 172.5 billion pesos in potential income by having NGCP operate the grid?
No, ma'am. No.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Similarly, back to Transco, how much was Transco paying by way of income tax when it operated the grid?
Before the concession, we are paying about 10 billion pesos annually.
Well, okay, Mr. Chair, that falls within my range of 7.9 to 17.3 billion pesos per annum. How much does NGCP pay on its 3% franchise tax, Mr. Chair?
We've collated it in all as 15 billion per annum on all the fees.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will need to follow that up later on kasi ang hinihingi ko po, hindi po yung all fees, pero yun lamang disaggregated na 3% franchise tax. So over the 25-year concession period, presuming na tama yung mga recent data ko, no? How much income did the Filipino people lose? So, of course, I cannot ask that of NGCP, pero ipa-follow up ko po yan as we continue the hearing, Mr. Chair. How much net income naman po did NGCP earn from 2009 to 2017, Mr. Chair?
We'll make computations, ma'am. We'll send the data later.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My own computations na nagawa na po namin are that from 2009 to 2017, NGCP earned a net income of about 184.486 billion pesos. And did NGCP declare any cash dividends during this period, 2009 to 2017, Mr. Chair?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What was the total amount of cash dividends distributed to its owners, Mr. Chair?
I'll revert back, ma'am, on the numbers, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Immediately, I could make of record to the committee na yung data ko is that the total amount of cash dividends distributed to NGCP's owners during 2009 to 2017 was around 187 billion pesos. So again, Mr. Chair, presuming that my numbers are correct, without NGCP in the picture, that 187 billion pesos would have gone to the Filipino people. Over the same period, how much has NGCP invested in upgrading and improving the grid, Mr. Chair?
180 billion, more or less.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Moving now from the, I'm sorry, 180 or 180 billion, 180 billion, Mr. Chair.
Yes, 180.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So moving now from the current and past financials, moving a little, stepping forward a little bit into the future. NGCP SCADA system, which we'll talk a lot about with General Esperon. NGCP SCADA system is connected by a fiber optic network, correct, Mr.
Yes,
Chair?
ma'am.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. What is the capacity or potential maximum bandwidth of this network, Mr. Chair?
I refer this to my technical guy.
Yes, please, Mr. Chair. The capacity or potential maximum bandwidth of this network.
Good morning, Your Honor.
Yes, sir.
The capacity of the bandwidth of fiber optic is dependent on the core that could be used, that could be assigned on the assigned capacity that will be provided. So we have 24 core fiber optics that are in place also.
So what is the potential assigned capacity of this bandwidth of the network, Mr. Chair?
Your Honor will just provide the technical data on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes,
Sorry, ma'am. Ma'am, Your Honor, Chairman, can I make a statement with all the answers that, yes, with all the questions that we're having?
I'll
It'll
just
only
have,
take us, 5 minutes.
of course, the chair will be the one to acknowledge our resource persons. I
Thank
just
you
have
very
5
much.
last
Thank you
questions.
very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So of the potential assigned bandwidth, which information will still be given to the committee, how much of this bandwidth is NGCP currently using? Do you have an estimate of is it 50%, 75%, 25% currently being used?
We'd like to have an executive session on those issues.
So I will leave, of course, that matter to the chair. But just finishing up with my last 4 quick questions on the financials. What does NGCP plan to do with the excess bandwidth, Mr. Chair?
Ma'am, as of now, on the fiber optic, we have an arrangement with the DICT, and the rest, we've been using it on our own personal use for our SCADA system.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If NGCP were to sell this bandwidth, what would be the projected gross revenue potential for this business, Mr. Chair?
We haven't looked into it, ma'am, because as of now, we have arrangement with DICT for the broadband project.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, dahil itatanong ko itong hypothetical question, I did look into it. And yung nakita kong projected gross revenue potential kung ibenta ng NGCP yung bandwidth would be about 22 to 31 billion US dollars. When the concession was auctioned, what was the value of the telecommunications business considered, Mr. Chair?
Ma'am, as for the fiber, if ever that there's an income for NGCP, 50% of this will go to government also for the lowering of the electricity rate.
And that would be
So,
50% of what value, Mr. Chair?
Well, I haven't seen the numbers yet we didn't value the telco because it was for our private use only.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, we'll have to examine that when we look at the second and third agenda of the concession agreement and the performance of NGCP, especially the concession agreement, because there were items mentioned explicitly there, as well as there were items that were not yet included. And lastly, Mr. Chair, for this, just to place on record questions to be further followed up with our resource persons on the concession agreement and the performance of NGCP. What are NGCP's current plans for its fiber optic network, Mr. Chair?
As of now, we're using it for our own use. And of course, there's a memorandum of agreement with the DICT. That's the only one that we have as of now, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before I have my last 3 quick questions also to ERC, thank you, Mr. Chair. Could I just ask Transco if you could confirm my numbers about, of course, what you said, what Transco earned on average annually from operating the transmission grid, what you were paying by way of income tax when you operated the grid, as well as the other questions and answers na tinanong ko po sa NGCP about before and currently, Mr. Chair.
Yeah,
Just a
Mr.
yes
Chair.
or no, Mr. Chair.
Yes. But do you want me to be under oath before I make my statements on the
Mi-
numbers?
Mr. Chair, before the chair acts on
Because
the
I'm willing
question
to
of
go
the
under
resource
oath.
person, I just have last three quick questions for ERC as a follow-up to my quick
Because
questions
if
to
I will
NGCP.
be, because there are some numbers that I want to correct. As to the net revenue,
Just to put on record, no, this is a formal hearing, so everything you say will be put on record
Okay, thank you.
and can be used in future.
so including the statement of Mr. Alvera,
Everything,
Mr. Chair.
no,
Okay,
everything
thank you.
can be used for future hearings and even litigation. No?
So the net revenue for the past,
Yes, let Senator Hontiveros
sorry.
finish.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just last three quick questions to ERC, following up on my questions to NGCP and Transco initially. Yes, ma'am. Chair Davanadera. ERC, you allowed NGCP to use a weighted average cost of capital of 18%. Is this accurate, Mr. Chair?
Let me just check our own records on the 18%.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. But my research of the records of ERC would show that it allowed NGCP to use that WACC or WACC of 18%. And ma'am, how does the WACC or the weighted average cost of capital affect the cost of electricity to the average consumer, Mr.
Well,
Chair?
the WACC is really a basic element in the computation of the rates, Your Honor. And may I continue?
Just last two quick questions. One last quick question, Mr. Chair. I've read reports putting the global average for the WACC or the weighted average cost of capital at 8%, less than about half of what you allowed NGCP to use of 18%, less than half. By allowing NGCP to use a higher WACC, doesn't this mean higher electricity prices for consumers, Mr. Chair?
May I just correct the 18%? I checked with our records, and it is 15.04%. Of course, it's higher.
15.0%,
Yes,
which
Your
is
Honor.
almost double the
The
global
8%.
average of 8%. So, hindi po ba mangangahulugan itong mas mahal na presyo ng kuryente sa ating mga consumers, Mr. Chair?
That was the WACC in 2010, Your Honor, and right now it is under review, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Under review, but again, when we pursue this in the hearings, Mr. Chair, lalabas na dapat mas maagang na review, not a decade after. Kasi mangangahulugan na mas mataas ang presyo ng kuryente sa ating mga consumers sa mas mahabang panahon. So, Mr. Chair, if I may, before the Chair rules on the advice to, and the request to go into executive session, may I just make of record, in broad strokes, the questions I will be asking. Thank you, General Esperon, including during the executive session. Yung mga tanong na itatanong ko po doon, Mr. Chair, are premised on, many of these questions will be about vulnerability assessment and penetration testing o VAPT, na sa research namin sa industry, yung VAPT, it's an important task to be carried out by IT administrators. Itatanong ko po sa Good General sa executive session kung VAPT ba yung isang paraan na ginagamit para siguruhin yung energy security at yung security din nung mismong grid na dinadaluyan ng energy. Meron po akong sample VAPT checklist. Itatanong ko kung ganito rin ang checklist na ginagamit ng ating NSA, mga 10 steps, kung ginawa ba nila yung bawat step, ano po yung naging bunga ng bawat step na ito. Tatanong ko rin po kung sinunod yung resolution ng ERC noong 2016, April, directing NGCP na magsagawa sa pamamagitan ng isang competitive bidding ng qualified third-party review ng NGCP performance, yung ating pong third agenda, NGCP performance as system operator ng ating national grid. Itatanong ko po kay General in executive session kung naisagawa na yung security audit, pero kung ngayon pa lamang, bakit na-perform natin ito only after concerns were raised and only after yung SCADA system ay operational for more than 10 years. And other questions, Mr. Chair, na will a company or its network administrator willingly admit that his or her network is not secure or that vulnerabilities exist? Siyempre, yung basic premise natin na kung gaano ka-importante yung national grid natin, transmission grid sa national security. Ginamit na nga po ni General yung termino na in use industry worldwide, yung transmission grid bilang CNI or critical national infrastructure. Itatanong ko rin po yung tungkol sa China recently issued a national intelligence law giving state intelligence agents the ability to demand cooperation from organizations while carrying out intelligence work. Totoo ba ito? At kung totoo, anong implikasyon nito sa ating energy, security, at iba pang mga tanong, Mr. Chair, all the way to Chinese control and management at yung iba pang mga technical aspects sa paggamit ng SCADA sa ating national grid. At this point, Mr. Chair, before I end my initial laying out of broad strokes ng mga tanong na itatanong ko kay General Esperon sa executive session, may I also ask Mr. Chair Transco to confirm that some of these are already old concerns raised even before the current concession agreement, Mr. Chair?
Yeah, kind indulgence, Senator Hontiveros. We'd like to also hear an opening statement from Secretary Cusi, and later on we'll give the others an opportunity to also give their statements.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Honorable Hontiveros. As you have stated, Mr. Chairman, the questions that we are trying to resolve here is the lingering issues and the same questions that we have raised from day one that we have assumed office. There are a lot of questions, including not just on the security, how the fiber optic is being used, who is using it, what revenue is being raised. We wanted to use that for the national broadband when we came in, but we never had the chance to really work on it. On the issue of audit, on the vulnerability of the system of our transmission grid, we have been asking that also from NGCP, and this is a good opportunity to once and for all have those questions answered. The questions that were raised also by Honorable Hontiveros about the revenue, the profitability, the concessions. We have raised that in this House, that 42% of the revenue that is being generated goes into dividends. And we have stated it also, even before, in the budget hearing, that the concession fee that NGCP paid to the government has been recovered by the dividends paid. So this Mr. Chairman, Your Honor, is a good opportunity to once and for all clarify things. And this will also answer the questions that we have raised, as I've said from the very beginning. We have asked NGCP to subject themselves from the audit. And unfortunately, we were not able to do so. So if you are asked if the system is, how vulnerable is the system, we won't be able to answer that. And that question, as you have said, Mr. Chairman, is a question that lingers our mind. And hopefully, it is answered in this hearing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Secretary Cusi. I understand that Mr. Almeida also has an opening statement, sir.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Honorable Hontiveros. The Honorable Senate Committee on Energy, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. NGCP is grateful for the invitation to discuss matters relating to the national grid. With this honorable committee's indulgence, we take this opportunity to clarify certain matters brought up by Transco and other government officials during the 2020 budget hearings and thereafter. NGCP takes security seriously. It welcomes this honorable Senate Committee's initiative to formulate a national strategy for the security and resiliency of the national grid and strengthen existing safeguards and protocols for responding to emergencies such as natural disasters, civil disturbances, and fortuitous events under IPIRA and the Philippine Grid Code. NGCP, as the state partner in the energy sector, is one with the government in this endeavor and commits to extend its full cooperation and achieve its national security objectives. First, as regard control over the system operations, in several public declarations, Transco claimed that NGCP system operations is presently controlled and operated by China through State Grid Corporation of China, or SGCCs. This is completely false. The management and control of system operation are exercised exclusively by Filipino engineers. Even the specifications of technical equipment sourced from various suppliers were designed by Filipino engineers before purchase orders were made. The fact that the number of these technical equipment were supplied by Chinese entities does not mean that SGCC now exercises control over the system operations. There is therefore no need to take over system operations from the Chinese and turn over the same to the Filipinos, since the control of the system operations has always been and remains to be with NGCP. NGCP respectfully rejects the suggestion that the control over system operations be carved out from NGCP. Such course of action runs counter to the express policy of the IPIRA to privatize the improvement, expansion, maintenance, and we stress operation of the transmission system. Privatization of transmission system operations was necessary in order to carry out the objective of the IPIRA, given the system operations lies at the very core of the transmission system and is directly related on how the winning concessionaire would service the public service. System operations cover one, control center, which allows NGCP to control and the dispatch and transmission of power throughout the grid. Two, the supervisory control and data acquisition, or SCADA system, which allows NGCP to control the course commands to the transmission assets. And three, fiber optic facilities, which NGCP uses for real-time communications with electric power participants. In short, control over system operation is what enables NGCP to ensure the reliability, adequacy, security, stability, and integrity of the national grid as mandated by the IPIRA. To be clear, however, NGCP does not control the system operations outside of the government's oversight. Under the IPIRA, it is the ERC and not Transco which regulates NGCP, and it is the ERC which administers the grid code, which in turn regulates NGCP's conduct of system operations. Humility aside, Mr. Chairman, it cannot be denied that NGCP has met and even exceeded its obligations in the transmission sector, thereby leading to a lower cost of electricity. NGCP is proud to report that since 2009 until 2019, NGCP has invested billions of pesos to replace and upgrade the aging system into a transmission superhighway capable of fully accommodating and continually increasing power needs of the country. NGCP has completed numerous projects nationwide in the total amount of 186 billion pesos. NGCP has built 5,626 transmission structures and 3,027 circuit kilometers of transmission lines and installed 15,634 megavolt amperes of substation capacity. NGCP has likewise taken up the government's directive to loot the entire country and is currently undertaking the Mindanao Visayas Interconnection Project. More importantly, under the regulatory supervision of the ERC, the average transmission rate have dramatically gone down from 73 centavos per kilowatt hour in 2009 to 51 centavos per kilowatt hour in 2019 to the benefit of the consumers. Simply put, Mr. Chairman, power brings progress, NGCP delivers. There is a reason why government restored to privatization in addressing systematic problems and allowing for better service to the public. Massive investments were needed to better transmission facilities. NGCP poured on those massive investments at no cost to the government. NGCP has lowered transmission costs without need of a former subsidies which depleted public coffers. NGCP remits to the government the amount of 14 billion to 15 billion a year in taxes, concession fees, and interest and ERC fees. Dahil sa IPIRA, malayo na po ang narating ng power sector kumpara nung naka-power crisis. To now authorize the carving out of system operation as suggested by Transco or Mr. Matibag would defeat the very objective of privatization under the IPIRA. Let me also state that the inclusion of system operation was an important assumption of the bid. If government decided to relieve itself of a multi-billion burden and to pass it on to the private sector, the private investor must be able to take government's word at face value and not be afraid that government would change the rules of the game midstream. Business is not conducted that way. It needs stability. Second, on the national security of the national grid and control over transmission operations, rest assured, Mr. Chairman and Ma'am Hontiveros, that NGCP has always prioritized the security and reliability of the transmission grid. NGCP has been running the national grid in accordance with its mandate, in full compliance with its franchise under Republic Act No. 9511, its concession, the Philippine Grid Code, and all other rules and regulations applicable to its business. In response to the unfounded accusation that NGCP unduly allows foreign executives and engineers to interfere with and control the operations of the transmission system, we clarified that SGCC does not exercise control over the power grid nor over NGCP. Tayo mga Pilipino po at hindi sino man dayuhan ang tanging may control ng ating grid. 60% of the outstanding capital stock of NGCP are held by domestic corporations, Monte Oro, Grid Resources Corporation, and Calaca High Power Corporation, which each holding 30%, whereas SGCC holds a minority share of 40%. We wish to emphasize that SGCC's shareholdings in NGCP is consistent with the Constitution. Moreover, during the bidding for the concession agreement, the government required the participation of financially and technically capable foreign participants to affiliate with Filipinos in a joint venture or consortium. This is because considering that the operation of the transmission business had always been monopolized by the state, only foreign participants possessed and relevant domestic and or international experience and expertise for the operation of the national transmission grid. At the beginning of operations, the Chinese advised NGCP on technical matters, given the experience and expertise. Over the years, the Chinese have passed on their know-how, and Filipino technical staff have acquired their own experience and expertise. At present, the only Chinese nationals within NGCP and the directors are the directors who were elected based on SGCC's proportionate shareholdings in NGCP. All executive and managing officers of NGCP are Filipinos, citizens. If there had been foreign nationals who were technical advisors in NGCP before, they had secured the necessary authority from the Secretary of Justice. As to statements attributed to some government officials which claim that the Chinese has been granted the power to remotely shut down the national transmission system, hindi po totoo ito. There is no provisional red button that can instantly turn off the grid. Kahit ako po, hindi ko maisasara ang grid na mag-isa. There are existing protocols that actually prevent the unsupervised remote access to the grid. I'm willing to discuss with this honorable committee these protocols, but only on executive session, as advised by our National Security Advisor. Disclosing this to the public would compromise their integrity. Let me just say at this point that the software and hardware system that controls the national grid, the SCADA system, is a standalone system that is not connected to the internet or any network. The SCADA is disconnected from the virtual private network or VPN by default, rendering an unsupervised direct remote access impossible. Even the passcode that I have as NGCP President, Chief Executive Officer, only provides network access to the SCADA system for repairs, to restore, and not shut down the grid in case of emergency. Mr. Chairman, this passcode has not even been used since the NGCP commenced its operation in 2009. This only goes to show that the security protocols which NGCP has put in place have and continue to work. There is also no truth to the insinuation that NGCP allows international remote access to the grid through the intercontinental submarine network installed by Huawei and allegedly linked to the national grid. In the first place, NGCP was not the one which installed said intercontinental submarine network. In any case, I earlier discussed unsupervised remote access to the SCADA is not possible because it is a standalone system. Third, as regards to the post-inspection and audit of NGCP, Mr. Chairman, we would like to dispel.
I think General Espronos has something to say.
The reason why I asked for an executive session is because I want to discuss in executive session the matters of the SCADA. Unless you would want me now to refute your claim that SCADA is independent or what?
No, it's only a statement from us. And we'd go on executive session.
Let me also say that that may not be conclusive.
Yes, I agree.
Okay. Can you
I'll
wrap
go on
up, please?
Yeah, I will. Just
Please
fast.
wrap up.
Yeah. Third, as regards to the post-inspection and audit of NGCP, Mr. Chairman, we would like to dispel any notion that NGCP is against the audit of the facilities system operations. The fact of the matter, Mr. Chairman, is that there is a regular inspection of NGCP's books and records conducted by Transco and PISAM pursuant to the concession agreement. Meron na pong technical data center sa NGCP para sa inspeksyon. What NGCP cannot accede to is the audit of the system operation with other facilities as demanded by Transco or Mr. Matibag, which is a virtual assumption of regulatory authority that the law denies it. The law and the concession agreement are clear that such audit may be ordered only by the ERC based on the standard defined in the Philippine Grid Code. The IPIRA specifies that only the ERC can impose sanctions and penalties, but Transco wants to do the performance of audit itself as a matter of regulation reserved only to the ERC. When the concession agreement plainly states that neither PISAM nor Transco has any regulatory rights for any act or inaction of the concession that are within the regulatory power of the ERC, to make its own determination, to impose any penalties on the concessionaire. NGCP will trust only the ERC, not only because the ERC was established by law as an independent quasi-judicial regulatory body, but because Transco or Mr. Martibag has so far been far from independent or fair, but also it has demonstrated a desire for power the law rightly withheld from it. Fourth, the alleged refusal of NGCP to conduct an IPO, we wish to emphasize that NGCP is not asking for an exemption from the requirement to list its shares of stock. NGCP intends to comply with the requirement of listing of its share. NGCP simply asks as a reasonable extension of the period within which to do so as expressed aloud under the Section 8 of its franchise, based on the ground that market condition is not suitable for such listing. NGCP thus filed its petition from the extension for the listing of the shares and presented its evidence in support thereof. The petition is now pending before the ERC. We trust that this honorable committee will respect the procedures stated in NGCP's franchise and allow the resolution of the issues before the ERC. As a final note, we assure this honorable committee that NGCP has always been committed to protecting the interest of the Filipinos. NGCP has conducted its business in full compliance with law and always with the end of view of providing every Filipino the opportunity of enjoying safe, efficient, and affordable electricity. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for this opportunity to address the Honorable Senate Committee on Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Almeda. As much as I want to, so it's quite refreshing to hear that NGCP is doing all of these things, no, to protect the Filipino public. But as much as I want to believe you, without any check and balance, it's very difficult for us to sleep every night without any lingering fear. And with the statement of Secretary Cusi earlier, even him has lingering fear. No? If the government entity that is tasked to conduct supervision over all electric power participants has lingering thoughts in his mind, kami pa, mga layman, ang hindi mawawala yan sa amin isip. So that's why check and balance is very important. No? You can say all you want, but without validation, check and balance, those things that you have mentioned will not be of use to us. No? So that's why it's imperative for government to exercise its mandate of check and balance to assure the public that all of the things that you have mentioned is indeed happening. No?
Mr. Chairman, I thought it will just be an opening statement that we were supposed to do, but I believe that was already a complete presentation of NGCP. So if the chairman would allow it, and with the indulgence of everybody, can we request also Transco to do its opening statement? Thank you.
Okay. Again, no, I divided this into three major topics. No? National security, the concession agreement, the franchise, and then third is the performance. Let's focus now on the national security aspect, because that is actually the core topic of the privileged speech of Senator Hontiveros. So let's limit it to that, and then later on, if time permits, we can go to the other topics. But I want to take advantage of the presence of General Esperon and Secretary Cusi on the topic of national security.
Mr. Chair, just as a quick follow-up. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just as a quick follow-up dun po sa remark ni General Esperon, for the record, so SCADA as a standalone system is not conclusive, General, Mr. Chair.
That will be part of my report, Madam Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
But on the questions that are supposed to be, if I may, on the questions that will be asked of me in the executive session, since I will not be issuing any statement about it, may I just say that if it is premised on BAPT, Vulnerability Assessment and Penetration Test, may I say that my presentation might not be on it. Second is that my presentation is based on a cybersecurity baseline assessment. I do not have yet a BAPT report, because a BAPT report will take more time. And it is indeed a welcome move that we will have a BAPT, but I will not be presenting a BAPT report. On other laws, I may propose, I really intend to propose for your consideration a bill which will deal on cybersecurity. It's, of course, co-authored with DICT.
So, Mr. Chair, just yung sinabi po ni General na so not conclusive, so it echoes yung sinabi po ninyo earlier na there are threats or security risks.
It is based on the dictum that there is no impenetrable barrier. If there are barriers or security uh, uh, instruments that we will have to put up there, there will always be a need for a review on the dictum that there is no impenetrable barrier.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And lastly, at this point, Mr. Chair, since in the second part of the hearings, we will be going more into the financials and the performance of NGCP. So I will continue to participate, Mr. Chair, dahil kailangan talagang busisihin yung franchise, no? So dapat talaga masiguro natin, dapat patas sa mga Pilipino. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Hontiveros. And I think Secretary Cusi requested Transco to say a short opening statement. And may I request, pakilipat Melvin ito, no? Because baka hindi makita naman ng kagandahang lalaki mo. Yeah, you can put it here kay Professor Wally sa tabi ni.
No, kasi yung mga ebidensya.
Yes.
Anyway, good morning, Mr. Chair and Senator Hontiveros. First of all, I would like to extend my deepest gratitude that we have this hearing finally. I promise, maiksi lang po, wala naman po akong prepare na written statement katulad ng preparation ni Mr. Almeida na nakita ko na meron na siyang mga sagot. In fact, there's one statement na I agree with Secretary Esperon to the executive session. It's a prepared statement, but he already know that there will be an executive session. Just to point it out.
Dinagdag ko lang yun.
I think I have the microphone. I was not talking anything. Anyway, Mr. Chair, Honorable Committee, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I came to Transco 3 years ago, and when I came to Transco, I'm innocent and ignorant of the issues, which made me probably look at it on a different way. With the guidance of the Secretary, that we approach it from the perspective of consumer. And also, I remember 3 months after my appointment, I took the oath of office with Malacanang, President Duterte mentioning that kayong gustong itama yung mga maling ginagawa at yung mga nakikita nyong mali, this is the chance na magpasikat kayo, kakampi nyo ako. And I remember him saying further, yung mga pasahero na dumadaan sa airport, pag hiningan kayo ng immigration, sampalin nyo. So I believe in those principles and I embrace it. I am a nobody compared to the owner of NGCP. 2 groups of owner from the Filipino side, both of them landing on top 10 Forbes magazine billionaires. Another is the SGCC, which is practically backed up by a giant country. I'm not against China, neither against NGCP. This hearing is not about me. Melvin Matibag, I heard my name several times. This is not about me. This is not about Mr. Almeida. This is not about Secretary Cusi. Neither this is about this committee. This hearing is about our children. I have 2 children. Right now, one is 7 years old. Another is 7 months. And I think this is about them. This is about our children. Not about me, not about Mr. Almeida, not about NGCP. So looking at it, saan ba ako nanggaling? I'm a local boy coming from a resettlement area. Happened to make it big in the city, so I thought. Pero hindi pala. What I am holding it to now is only the truth. NGCP have all the money. NGCP have friends and connections that can ruin people's life if you go against them. If you look at the statement, we will not submit to Transco. We will only submit to ERC. We are not exercising regulatory power. Section 703 of the concession agreement mentioned that as a mandate of Transco to make sure that the concession agreement is put properly to practice. Sabi doon, inspection and examination, not regulation. We submit to that. It is the role of ERC to regulate. It's a good thing that Senator Hontiveros pointed out that in August 2016, there was already an order of audit to NGCP. Ano nangyari? Ano nangyari? Again, I will say this is not about me. Lumabas po itong hearing na to during the budget deliberation of DND and DOE. Tinanong kami. Ang tanong sa amin, meron bang possibility, may threat ba? I don't think you go to any other country, wala magsasabi na hindi. Because everybody is vulnerable to attack. And history will say that. It happened in other countries. Ukraine, for that matter. 2015, 2016, there was already an attack. Again, this is not about NGCP. This is not about business. If it's about business, about you, let me run the numbers. For 10 years, net income, 205,928,000. Senator Hontiveros, with all due respect, I would like to correct the number. It's not 184 billion. It's 205,928 billion. And the revenue, yun po yung revenue. Pero magkano yung cash dividend na binigay doon sa Big Three? Yung tatlo pong may-ari ng NGCP. 187 billion 839, which is 91.2% of the net revenue. Ano ibig sabihin nito? Ibig sabihin, NGCP is not investing enough on capital expense and debt servicing. Kung kaya, meron tayong mga power problem. Well, let me go back to national security. Baka po, i-call ni Senator Gatchalian. Balik ako rin, sabi ko, yun yung sinabi namin. And they've been denying and attacking me also na there is no red proverbial button that can turn off the power grid. Totoo naman ho na ganun, but the question is, it can be remotely controlled. What is the system being used? Alam mo ninyo, 1 year after mag-assume ng NGCP, bago pa po yung mga equipment, which is ABB, General Electric, and Siemens, pinalitan na po kagad nila ng NARI, which is a Chinese the system. NARI 3000. If you go to the website of NARI, kung napuntahan nyo noon, anong sabi? Ang sabi nila, they control the power grid of the Philippines. Yung NARI po ang nagsabi niyan sa website nila. Kaya ang tanong ko po, are we vulnerable? Are we really protected? And thank you for this hearing. Marami pa po akong gustong sabihin, like Mr. Almeda, ang dami niyang sinabi. But again, we will answer it on the proper hearing pag tinol po nila. So, alam mo ninyo, just last week, somebody advised me, there's nothing great that will come easy. And I know, yun yung totoo. That is what we are experiencing now. Now the question is to all of you, to the people, to our politicians, to the media, anong gagawin natin? Remember, this is not about Melvin Matibag or Anthony Almeida. This is about our children. This is about our 6, 7 years old or younger children. So let me put the challenge. And yung report po namin on the national security, Professor Wali made the presentation. So, Mr. Chair, yun lang ho yung opening statement ko. This is not about Melvin Matibag. This is about the truth. Because that's the only thing that I have right now, the truth. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Attorney Matibag. Just to pursue the topic of national security, I have some questions to General Esperon. General, is the national transmission grid imbued with national security interest? I think that's a basic question that we need
Thank you, Mr. Senator.
to settle.
As I said in my opening statement, as I said in my opening statement, national security, as insofar as national security actually involves not just the grid, but it also involves the sources of energy that must be uninterrupted and secure or protected. Number two, there is efficient delivery of electricity from these sources to all households and economic sectors throughout the country. Number three, the energy sources must become sustainable and developed, and electricity is affordable. In other words, the matter of energy security is a concern for all of us. For all of us, for many departments. It's actually not only just a whole of government, but also a whole of nation concern. And one of the pillars of that security is the secure transmission grids. And therefore, if we look at it from that point of view, the national transmission grid is truly part of national security.
Thank you, General Esperon. Well, there's only one transmission grid in the Philippines that delivers power from Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. Without that transmission grid, we don't have electricity. It's as simple as that. That's why this is a very important, vital infrastructure. And to make matters more complicated, it's a monopoly. There's only one of its kind here in our country. That's why with recent times, we need electricity for virtually everything, from your mobile phones, from running your offices through businesses. That's why this is a very important infrastructure that is imbued with national security interests. That's why we need to make sure that not only it delivers electricity, but it's not vulnerable to state and non-state actors. We're now also looking at non-state actors, because what the term cyber terrorism is now becoming a buzzword, not only here in Asia, but also in the whole world. That's why we have to be assured, all of us, the legislature and the public, that this infrastructure not only delivers electricity as their core mandate, but also to implement mechanisms to make sure that it's not vulnerable. Sabi nga ni General Esperon, this is impenetrable. So we have to make sure that that doesn't happen to us. And my next question, yes.
Just a quick follow-up, Mr. Chair, dyan sa recent point nyo. And in fact, baka hindi lang natin pinag-uusapan non-state actors tulad ng State Grid Corporation of China, pero baka state actors din. Kasi ang SGCC is arguably, and we can pursue that in the hearings and even in the executive session, ang SGCC ay related sa estado mismo ng China at sa Chinese Communist Party din, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Secretary Cusi.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. On the issue of energy security, sustainability, and uninterruptible supply, it's not only about the cyber issue. Another thing that we should look into is the ancillary service, the reserves. The reserve is very important, and that is another issue that we have against NGCP. So if you're going to look at the whole thing, then the reserve issue has to be also looked at, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Cusi. My next question, General Esperon. Since 2009, since this is a vital infrastructure that we all acknowledge, since 2009, what has government done to make sure that this vital infrastructure is secured and safeguards are being implemented as prescribed by the concession agreement as well as the franchise and also the general powers of government? Ano pong ginagawa ho ng gobyerno to make sure that it's secure?
Early on, from the security sector, it has been recognized that a threat could easily come from inside. At that time, 2009, if we go back to the two times, cybersecurity might not have been in the minds of everyone. But the security sector has always look at weaknesses in personnel security clearances. And therefore, it is in this area that the then National Security Advisor and NICA look into the personalities that are inside. There used to be technical people there. They are members of, they come from from a private corporation, which, as they say, is run by, is also is a state corporation. I do not know if there are many corporations in China that are not, where the government has no stake. And so the efforts were then at the personal security clearances, including, of course, their permits to come in as workers. We have done that. There were other things that we did, but I wish to discuss that in an executive session because it boils down to some things that we should do only and discuss only among the security sector.
General Esperano, I would like to put this in a overarching topic, no? Not just focus on NGCP and its vulnerabilities, but the possibility of cyber attacks, no? And this can happen in any grid, for that matter. As mentioned by Attorney Matibag, it happened in Ukraine, no? General Esperon, is the grid, national grid, our national grid, vulnerable to cyber attacks?
Because it is supposed to be a virtual private network, it is that dark fiber is used only by NGCP. Then it is not open to internet. As they claim, because it's not part of internet, it becomes safer than the ordinary internet. And so it may not be very vulnerable to hacking as we know it now, but it can still be penetrated by way of physical intrusion into the system itself. By physical intrusion into the dark fiber, or as I said, by persons who have interests that are not consonant with our interests. And so that can always come, not because they are from other countries, but there could be other motivations. And so personal security is always important in running these critical infrastructures. The SCO, the operations itself is run by people, so it is there where there are vulnerabilities.
General, it's vulnerable.
It can be vulnerable.
The possibility.
But as I said, there is no impenetrable barrier.
And since it's the possibility of it being vulnerable, have we conducted or implemented any of the safeguards as prescribed by law? And what are those safeguards, General?
Indeed, as has been mentioned, Senator Hontiveros mentioned this. There should have been NGC, the National Grid Corporation should have procured an independent third party to conduct an independent review of its operations and systems operator. There was in 2018 KPMG, but we would like to know if that was submitted or furnished to, if that report was furnished to government regulators.
General, let me just to put this in context again. No? What are the safeguards as prescribed by the franchise and concession agreement and also other general laws? No? Ano ba yung mga safeguards na ilinagay doon?
We have primarily on the SCADA, and there is what they call a cyber security operations room in all the controls, and it is through that system where some of the controls are put in.
Mr. Chair. Importante yung tanong ni Mr. Chair when he directs our attention to any grid around the world. Kasi totoo, hindi lang naman NGCP ang national grid ng sino mang bansa. In every country, yung grid din nila is a natural monopoly. Pero kaya ganun kaimportanteng itanong, ano yung implikasyon sa atin, pati sa energy security and national security natin, na State Grid Corporation of China owns 40% of our grid. I wonder if there's any other national grid in the world na may ganyang kalaking participation ng dayuhang bansa
I do not
sa grid
know.
nila. Even, General, even SGCC itself, papayag ba sila
I
na
do
may
not-
foreign
I
co-owner
do not know
ng
how
grid
much
nila? I doubt
SGCC
it.
has control over the Brazil grid. There
It's
are,
good
there
to
are.
examine, Mr. Chair. Pero dito lang sa Pilipinas, SGCC owns 40% of our grid at hindi nga siya ordinaryong kumpanya. It's owned by the Chinese Communist Party. They are bound by law, ang SGCC, to gather intelligence and report to the Chinese government if requested, and they may not refuse. So, paano tayo secure? Paano pag nagka-conflict, diplomatic, political between Philippines and China, kanino papanig yung SGCC sa ating grid, Mr. Chair?
Well, the franchise was awarded by Congress, so perhaps we should also ask Congress why it was awarded.
And Congress, and very well taken, Mr. Chair, and Congress may amend the
Oh, yes, of
provisions, Mr. Chair.
But,
Secretary Cusi.
but let me not go into geopolitics, but if somebody else won this, if another foreign entity or company won this, the threats are the same as we look at it now. So this is not all about one nationality.
Agree, Mr. Chair.
I just want to talk about it as being an area where there is so much to secure.
Secretary Cusi.
Mr. Chairman, yes, vulnerability in energy is not only on the transmission, but as well as on the distribution and even on the GENCO. And DOE has been making measures, working with GENCO and the distribution utilities. And on the GENCOs and the distribution utilities, we are getting headway sa pagkuhan po noon dahil they cooperate. Ang issue po rito on the vulnerability of the transmission grid is because of uncooperative attitude of NGCP to subject themselves to audit. Ngayon po, yung question po ng ownership is not the issue about sa vulnerability. It's not about China. Anybody can do it. Ang importante po, and like any other countries, ang importante is that we have the security measures that we have adopted, and we have the redundancy. And that is the purpose of the audit, what we have been asking from the very beginning, for us to be able to say, ano nga ba ta sitwasyon? Yun lang naman po ang hinihingi ng mga tao. And how do we answer that? We can only answer that if we subject NGCP to a thorough audit ng sistema po. Kasi kung sino makakapag-off po niya, kahit even the banks, and any pong services na pwede po naman talagang nahahack po naman. No? So, ang lang po natin is how much protection do we have? Are we really amply protected? Ay paano po natin masasagot yun? Eh kung hindi po natin, matagal na po namin hinihingi ng mga audit 2017, 2018, 2019. And in fact, the last one po, yung sinabi po ng NGCP, yes, they are open to audit. Ano po ang ginawa natin? Padala po akong sulat, padala po akong Transco, padala po ako ng DOE, and gave them the protocol of audit. They said that they will answer it the following day. Wala. How do we tell the people na paano po natin masasabi na, oh, it's safe? Hindi po namin masabi po yun, no? And the only way to really answer that, i-audit natin ng mabuti. And wala po tayong hangad, and that is for the good also of NGCP. As Melvin Matibag said, it's not about NGCP. It's about the system on how secured we are. So may problema po doon sa distribution, tinitingnan po natin yon. Yung sa GENCO, tinitingnan po natin yon. Pero itong sa transmission, it's an issue na hindi po natin mga masagot yon. Po. So sana po, hindi naman po pinagtatanggol ang China. It's not about China. It's not about the ownership. The law allows a 60-40 ownership. So ang importante po, nasa atin ang control, nasa atin ang operation, nasa atin ang system control, then safe po ang ating magkakaroon po tayo ng safe system. Maraming salamat po.
I acknowledge the comments of Secretary Cusi na there are built-in safeguards, no, in the franchise, in the concession agreement, even in our constitution, which was the basis for the franchise. Number one, the ownership. It has to remain with Filipinos, 60% of the ownership. Number two, management position, executive position should be with the Filipinos. No? That's enshrined in our constitution. And those two important safeguards became the basis of the issuance of the franchise. No? Sa franchise, meron pa nga iba doon, takeover, no? Which is another safeguard. And there are general clauses there that takeover can happen when peace and order is in jeopardy and public is in peril. No? These are very broad general powers that the franchise gave the president. But another important safeguard is the inspection, because that's the only way we can validate. No? And in fact, I acknowledge the action of the Department of Energy. You issued 3 department orders or department circulars to conduct inspection. Meron po nangyari doon sa 3 department order? Meron ho noong 2017, dalawa in 2017. Did you conduct any inspection for the purpose of assessing possible vulnerabilities in the system? Meron ho kayong, may nangyari ba dito, Secretary, in other words? Because I can see that you have been exerting effort, no? But meron ba ho nangyari?
Wala po. At ang kwan nga po lagi is that we are kwan po sa legal issue. Ano po? At sinasabi na ERC nga lang po ang pwedeng magkwan sa kanila. Ang body that is being recognized. They don't recognize.
But in the concession agreement, it's very clear. No? Let me just put slide 8. And then nakasulat doon, in section 7.03, this was raised by Attorney Matibag, permits such representatives to inspect the transmission assets and witness any aspect of the performance of the agreement. The performance is very broad. No? Cyber vulnerability assessment and cyber security is part of the performance. No?
Kaya nga po, Mr. Chairman, doon sa opening statement po ni Mr. Almeda, sinasabi nga po niya na hindi nga po kinukunan sa Transco at sa ERC lang po ang laging ibinibigay na rason.
Have you brought this up to the President, Secretary? Because this is a national security issue, and since the President is the chairman of the National Security Council, have you brought this up to the President?
We have brought it up, and it's not just the issue of national security, Mr. Chairman.
And any word from the President?
Actually, we are. This is supposed to be one of the agenda of our cabinet meeting, Mr. Chairman.
I suggest you make this as the main topic for the next National Security Council, General Esperon and Secretary Cusi. Secretary Cusi is not a member, no, of the council? Are you a member?
Actually, Mr. Chairman, sa national security, pa naman po yon, yung nag-uusap po kami, pinag-uusapan po itong bagay na ito, na talagang this is a real concern. No? Pero po yung pagdulog po natin, yung sa issue sa Pangulo, it is more of yung mga complex issues po.
But Secretary Cusi, kailangan na po mapag-usapan to sa National Security Council, and the President being the chairman should understand, should have full appreciation, no? Because the advisor is saying that this is a vital infrastructure imbued with national security interest. And DOE is saying that hindi ho kami pinapapasok doon kaya hindi ho namin alam kung ano yung detalye. So there's a gap here, and I strongly think the National Security Council can address that gap. The President has vast powers. No?
Kaya nga po dito sa nangyaring ito, nagkaroon po naman ng audit na conducted by National Security. Unfortunately, again, this is another question in our mind, bakit hindi kami kasama?
Mr. Chair, hindi kasama ang DOE sa National Security Audit?
Yeah, Madam Chair, Mr. Chair.
May I answer? We are a technical team. We have formed a technical team to do the cybersecurity baseline assessment. And we are working, first of all, as the National Cybersecurity Interagency Committee, which I co-chair with the ICT. And so that is our authority in coming in there. DOE and Transco have their own authority to get into, and I'm just wondering why it has turned out this way, that there are barriers in going into NGCP. But I was aware of that, and what I had in mind is we had to do something. It's part of our job, so we just simply coordinated with them, and we went in with a team from which was concerned with cybersecurity and not on ownerships or on other things. We are there on a technical mission, actually.
Mr. Chairman, I have no problem NSA being allowed to conduct the audit. I have no problem with that, and I don't even question that. They should. But the question is that how come NGCP allowed NSA, and here is DOE and Transco that has been asking over the years, and just sana pinayagan nilang kwan para na hindi umabot sa ganito ang naging problema.
Secretary Esperon, General Esperon, kailan po yung next NSC NSC meeting?
We have our short of the National Security Council itself. We have what we call the Security, Justice, and Peace cluster of the cabinet. We just had our cluster meeting last Friday.
May we request to include this in the
Yes.
agenda,
We
and
will do that.
in the next hearing we would like to discuss in broad strokes, no? Whatever you can disclose, because again, this is a national security topic. Whatever you can disclose to the best of your judgment, so that we will be enlightened on how to move forward. What we want to achieve today is also how to move forward, no, with the aspect of national security, not only pointing fingers but also plugging the gaps. No? Mr. Almeda, you were raising your hand.
Yes, thank you for giving me the chance to talk. And on the inspection, to put on record with Transco, meron naman ho kaming daily inspection. Actually, weekly ba o monthly pa yata kami. Every Friday nga ho, sinusulatan pa nga ako ni Mr. Matibag on inspections. And we answer. And then the whole team has been going around for the inspection. So on the audit itself, the ERC is there for us to look on all the issues. That's why ERC is under the Philippine Grid Code, so under the concession. So those are our, and when it comes to, I'd like to point out also.
Before you continue, let me
Yeah.
acknowledge presence of Senator Gordon.
Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, nagtataka nga ako, marami na sa resource persons natin nagbanggit sa ERC, pero parang ang tahimik ng ERC sa hearing na ito. Ma'am, bukod po sa dapat mas maagang review nung WACC, Weighted Average Cost of Capital, meron na po kayong ang ERC bilang the regulatory body, meron na po kayong utos na magsagawa 2016 o 2017, magsagawa ng bidding process para sa isang third-party audit sa NGCP. So, bakit po hindi na-enforce ang mga ito ng primary regulatory body sa energy sector, Mr. Chair?
Thank you very much for asking us to explain. We could not volunteer as it seems that questions were on queue. Anyway, it's true that there was an ERC resolution number 4, series of 2016, wherein this resolution particularly mandates the review. However, this was not implemented, Your Honor, because it was not acted upon immediately then by ERC, and there were subsequent problems because of the vital participation of the national, the Grid Management Committee Incorporated. This was actually disbanded, or the corporate life of this corporation was shortened the other year, because we found that there is really no legal basis for the registration of this. So the third party that was supposed to have been procured or bidded out, we were not, well, the present commission was not able to do. The second place, Your Honor, the practice then was for NGCP to provide for the funds to be used in hiring the consultants. And this commission at present believe that the regulated agency who will be reviewed and evaluated should not be providing the funds, much less conducting the bidding, and with the results of the third party being merely passed on to ERC. And the ERC could not have conducted the procurement earlier, except this year, when the Senate, when Congress already provided us with the funds. In other words, for this particular instances, it is the belief of the Commission that the cost of this kind of regulation should be with the government and not with the regulated agency. That is subjected to review. So, as I mentioned earlier, ERC will be conducting the review on the performance, and in fact, we are now finalizing the TOR. We have finalized it, except that when the issue on vulnerability came up, we are including the vulnerability aspect as part of the TOR. Our target is for the terms of reference to be finalized and the procurement process to be done within the first quarter of this year, since under the 2020 GAA, there is already funds that ERC can use in the procurement of the third-party consultant.
Tama, Mr. Chair, may pondo na sa wakas para sa isang audit or even a VAPT sa 2021. But i-note ko lang po, Mr. Chair, I mean, narinig natin po yung paliwanag ng ERC, but 2021 is 5 years after iniutos ng Regulatory Commission na magkaroon ng bidding at saka audit na iyon. So kahit pa may na-disband na committee, yung Grid Management Committee, kahit hindi nagawa yung bidding out noon, kahit hindi na-provide yung funds earlier, it should not take half a decade para rin yung regulation ay masunod. Just for the record, Mr. Chair, medyo slightly unbelievable na nandito tayo sa ganitong sitwasyon, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Mr. Chair. Yeah, yung question nyo lang po on bakit ano nangyari doon sa circular na inisyu ng DOE. Ang nangyari po ron, either legally inargue, meron pa nga po ron, pinailan nila ng TRO para wag mangyari. Well, my point is, it already established a pattern that just from the words of the President of NGCP, talagang ayaw nilang magpa-subject sa audit or sa examination. He mentioned, meron daw kaming daily na inspection. Meron naman po talaga yung tinatawag na TR plot na doon nagmi-meeting kami kung paano namin matitingnan kung ano yung nangyayari, kung yung bang ginagawa nila yung responsibility na doon sa concession agreement. Pero katunayan, yun nung dala kong isang box dito, kanina na dala-dala ko, yun yung mga sagutan namin na ayaw na nilang magpa-inspect. Just recently, pumayag sila na, sige, tuloy na natin ulit yung TR plot na i-inspect natin. Pero, hindi kayo pwedeng mag-photocopy, hindi kayo pwedeng mag-picture. Kung may ino-notes kayo, i-notes nyo lang. Talagang ito, subject ko to doon sa plain view. Baka sabi lang na nakapunta yung Transco tinignan, ganun ho yung nangyayari. So, I don't know if we still, kung may control pa tayo ng NGCP. And I remember that question posed by the good Senator Gordon during the deliberation ng budget ng DOE. Huwag yun ang sagutin, sabi niya, kung may control tayo. So, hindi ko na rin siguro sasagutin, but I think in your minds now, all of you here, alam nyo ano nangyayari. Kasi yung last na sinasabi ni Secretary Cusi, we wrote them a letter. Pumunta si Yusek Vanessa together with representative of Transco. Binigay namin yung letter. Na sinabi naman nila kasi sa media, sinasabi nila, willing kami magpa-audit, open kami. So sulat kami, yung sulat ko, in view of your pronouncement in the media that you're willing to audit, may we now discuss the protocols of audit. We attach the protocol, I signed it. In the name of President Almeda, kung agreeable sila. That is December 2, I remember. Ano na ho ngayon, no? February 3. Ilang buwan na. Ang dami ho namin sulat to audit. In fact, may instance pa nga po, just to stop the pattern na talagang ayaw nilang may control. Meron ho kaming ginagawa to know the extent of ownership of Transco to the right of way. So nag-hire po kami ng mga geodetic engineers and in MOA with the Land Registration Authority so that we determine the metes and bounds and the ownership of Transco para alam po namin. So sa Pangasinan po, pumunta yung mga agents namin doon, kinasuhan pa ho nila ng trespassing eh. Can you just imagine, we own the facility, but we cannot go inside.
So in other words, Secretary Cusi, have we conducted any vulnerability assessment and penetration testing? Wala tayong ganun na ginawa since 2009.
None, because they never allowed us to perform the audit, Mr. Chairman.
And can I ask NGC, bakit hindi nyo naman pinayagan? No? How can government exercise its check and balance power? And it's clear in the concession agreement that they can go in and inspect.
Yes,
No?
in the
You know, all of this putting roadblocks and barriers, hindi nyo ma-avoid sa isipan natin na merong tinatago eh. The lack of transparency will lead to this naturally. No? That's why we're here, because of this lack of transparency. So how come the DOE, which is the general supervisor of all the energy sector, of the entire energy sector, hindi napayagan mag-inspect?
There are certain items for audit, and then there are certain items that ERC can audit for us. It's in the concession agreement. So on items on system operations, it's the ERC. And on items on our everyday work, it's Transco and of course DOE, Senator. So we've been in, there has been inspections, as we call it, every week or every month. Although there are letters also from our good friend Mr. Matibag on inspections. And there are others that we don't allow also because it's under the provision of our concession agreement. And it's in the Philippine Grid Code. And it's during the time it was the Grid Management Committee that looks on the vulnerability of the grid.
Yung sinasabing daily, ang dami kong sulat eh. Doon sa nilagay ko ritong ganyang atas.
Mr. Chairman, padlock pa nga lang ho, tsaka ilaw. Yun ang mga ini-inspection niya.
Can you, I'll let you speak when the chair will let you speak.
Alam nyo ho, yung coverage ng inspection namin na nilimit nila, doon na lang ho sa mga dati nang nandoon na facilities. There are yung mga PUCs kasama, project under construction. Pero, yung mga bagong ginagawang proyekto, hindi na ho nila pinapa-inspect sa amin. Andun ho yan sa mga sulat. Sabi ho, where I'm coming from, I'm a lawyer, the best evidence rule is the written document. The document will speak for itself. Another principle in rules of evidence, the most suppressed evidence could be the most damaging evidence. So doon siguro pumapasok yun, ayaw pakita sa atin, baka may tinatago. Kasi kung walang tinatago, Mr. Chair, we can all end this hearing and all of us go there and make the audit, tingnan natin kung ano yung mga assessment. Yung project under, yung mga bago pong proyekto, ayaw nilang ipa-audit, ayaw nilang pakita sa amin. Pero yung trabaho po ng Transco, to to protect the interest of the public. Bakit po? Yung sinasabi po nila mga investment na nilagay nila yan, hindi naman po nila investment yan eh. Investment ng taong bayan. Kasi siningil ho yan sa taripa. Lahat po yan sinisingil nila sa tarif. Let me tell you, yung 15.04 nila na WACC, pag naggastos sila ng 1 milyon, may interest silang 15.04 eh. You can easily go to the bank and ask the bank for a loan for 3%. So, ano ba nangyari sa atin dito? Ano nangyari?
Mr. Chair, I think yung isang nag-emerge dito sa mga diskusyon natin ay kapag yung isang critical national infrastructure tulad ng isang power grid ay na dapat tumatakbo as a matter of course under a very clear concession agreement sa ilalim ng mga batas, EPIRA man yan o yung Philippine Grid Code, meron namang supposedly regulatory body. Pero nagkakaroon ng mga weird na mga sitwasyon na yung mga dapat na natural na inspection o audit na hindi na didelay ng kalahating dekada ay hindi nangyayari. Kailangan pa natin magdaos, Mr. Chair, ng ganitong hearing para lamang sabihin ang mga probisyon ng agreement, ang mga probisyon ng mga batas ay dapat tinutupad. Kung may regulatory body na parang nagpipigil or ang bagal gumalaw, 5 years bago mag-enforce ng isang bagay na nasa mandato nila, it becomes all the more reasonable, Mr. Chair, na tignan natin ulit yung mga probisyon na yan, whether ng agreement or kahit pa ng mga batas, EPIRA mismo, Philippine Grid Code, para hindi sila nababali at hindi nagkakaroon ng ganyang opaqueness sa halip na transparency at hindi, lalo na when we go into the discussion on the financials and on the performance, na hindi ito nagre-resulta na nagiging mas mahal pala ang, or hindi kasing mas mura ang presyo ng kuryente sa mga consumers. Parang maganit kasi yung nagiging discussion, Mr. President, Mr. Chairman, between our different resource persons. So, tayo naman in aid of legislation. So, mukhang nagiging mas reasonable talagang i-review yung lahat ng mga dapat i-review, Mr. Chair.
By way of process, no, when this was privatized, Congress issued the franchise, and the basis for that franchise is the concession agreement, correct? Nandun na yung concession agreement. In fact, in the transcript, during the interpolation of the franchise, the concession agreement were always referred to. And the senators then took everything in the franchise and used that as their basis to issue, took everything in the concession agreement and took that as the basis to issue a franchise for you to operate. Because hindi kayo makaka-operate without the franchise. One of those will be the inspection. No? And that's why in the concession agreement, it's very broad performance. And in my view, performance includes vulnerability assessment and also protection from cyber attacks and also cybersecurity. Performance is a very broad word, but you can only perform when your vulnerability is assessed and your risk is covered. Ngayon, my view here is if government will not be allowed to exercise its check and balance role, then we have to look at once again, the franchise. No? Because that's the power of Congress. We might not touch the concession agreement because that's outside of our purview, but the franchise is definitely within the purview of Congress. And to include an oversight, no? And to include explicitly to cover cybersecurity, to cover inspection, and to explicitly let government exercise its check and balance function. But on the extreme case, no, Congress can even revoke it if they see that there is a credible threat to the operations of our grid. No? What is important right now, and I would like to implore this to NGCP, is to allow government to exercise its check and balance role. Kailangan talagang gawin yan. Yung sinabi niyo ho kanina are beautiful words, But without government validating it, I'm sorry to say, but I cannot believe you. No? That's why it's imperative for government to exercise this role. No? And that's their job. And that's imbued in the concession agreement as well as in the franchise.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Yun pong sa why we were not able to audit or inspect the system, the operation of Transco. Just to say it again, nagkaroon po ng TRO. So, kaya nga po nagrereklamo kami kung bakit in the government agencies exercise of its function, nati-TRO. So, maybe in a granting of a franchise, a way forward, granting a franchise, kailangan po ang gobyerno, not just on NGCP, but other franchises that are being issued, kailangan po hindi makukan yung mapiprevent ang government from exercising its function, especially on matters of security. Matagal na po itong issue na ito. Kaya lang, sabi nga po natin, na-TRO tayo, and fortunately, ngayon nakapag-audit na po ang NSA. But again here, I would ask NGCP to allow Transco and DOE to make that assessment and answer the questions of those lingering questions, no po? Sinong gumagamit ng fiber optic, ano pinagkakagamitan yan, ilang porsyento ginagamit sa transmission, sino nakikinabang, how can we bring down this the rates ng cost sa transmission, tapos an issue on part of the security, sustainability, yun pong issue ng reserve, no po? Yun po, talagang marami pong mga lingering issues, even the right of way. If we don't resolve this, if we don't clear this up, this will be a monster at the end of the concession period.
Just flash slide 25. No? I got this from the internet. And this is a reality that can happen here. No? This is the Ukraine power cut that was mentioned earlier. We're in 200, close to more than 200 residents didn't have power. No? And this is a penetration of the grid by hackers. Of course, whether it's state or non-state is another question, but it can happen. And without government assuring us that they have conducted the VPAT, no, as raised by Senator Hontiveros, we cannot sleep at night. Secretary, hindi tayo makakatulog because tomorrow this can happen, next week this can happen, and more the economy is very dependent on the flow of electricity.
Mr. Chairman, pag nangyari po yun, kami po ang inyong totortahin eh. Kaya mas mabuti na nga po na na-address na ngayon ito. Salamat po.
Mr. Chair, and further investigative reports following yung pong attack on the Ukraine grid traced it, well, the eventual theory or accusation was cyber attack siya ng Russia. And there are 3 countries that have figured since that 2016 cyber attack sa mga actual or perceived sources ng mga cyber attack laban sa grids ng ibang mga bansa, and these are Russia, Iran, and China. So, importante talaga masiguro natin yung energy security ng ating grid against such cyber attacks. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Let's flash again that there.
Can I,
Go ahead.
thank you for the floor, Mr. Chairman. Maybe can I reiterate that maybe the question that we should ask is how fast do we respond? NGCP has been responding as fast. We have 22 calamities every year. We have proven ourselves that we have worked hard and having electricity for the grid. And on the cyber attack, for the past few weeks that we're here, we've been attacked 100 times already. So as we speak, we don't know. It's from the outside. We've seen our net. So that's why this is very
Don't you think
crucial.
that
This
if
is
you're
very
being
critical.
attacked, you should inform your principals, particularly Transco and ERC and the government?
Yeah,
And you're just telling us that now that you're being attacked?
Yes,
Now?
it's a detection, Mr.
No,
Senator.
no, no, you said attack.
Yes, it's a detection.
These are big words. So you say
Yeah,
you're
sorry,
being attacked.
sorry. Detection. So what I'm saying is, it's how we respond as fast
You-
where we are.
Mr. Chairman.
That is the point here, Mr. Almeda. You're being attacked or slash
Detected. Detected.
attack or undetected, but these are things that government should know. Dapat malaman namin to because una-una saan nang gagaling? Pangalawa, bakit? Ba't kayo lang nakakaalam niyan eh?
It's all over naman, whether it's banks, whether it's
Yeah,
it's
but
all
no,
over.
no, we're not
Yeah.
talking about banks. We're talking about the national grid of the country.
Yes, that's why what I'm saying.
And
is
now
as,
you've disclosed to us that
as
there
we
are
speak now-
100 attacks.
as we speak now, there'll be attempts. There's
Yeah,
always
but government
attempts,
needs
yeah.
to know that.
Yeah.
That's what our point.
Mr. Chairman, the gentleman, Mr. Almeida, teaches us to ask the proper questions. Is that your premise here, that you're teaching us to ask you the right questions?
No, Senator.
We're asking you the right questions here. You use the word attack, and I bristle at it. If you're being attacked, then we must know. Your principals must know. And then you come out with another question. It happens every day. Banks are being attacked. Then we should know also, don't you think so? And that's why the issue here is that they keep asking you, para kang tenant ng bahay na pinaupa sa inyo eh. Ayaw niyong papasukin yung mag-i-inspection, baka naglagay ka na dyan ng makakasunog, makakadisgrasya, ayaw mong papasukin. Bakit ayaw niyo papasukin? Anong tinatago niyo? Siyempre, pag nagtanong sila, sino ba nagpapatakbo dyan? May Russians na ba dyan? Meron na bang mga Chinese naman na dyan? Ang dinig namin, 40%. Marami kayong engineers. Ang dinig namin, ang instructions doon sa makina niyan ay panay Chinese. Ang dinig namin, yung NARIC, yun ang NARI, no? Yun ang umaabot sa labas ng China. Pwede lang patayin ang grid natin from China. Is that correct?
No,
They cannot do that.
they cannot do that.
Are you sure?
Well, as far
Why
as
is it there then?
as far as
Why is it there then? Answer the question. If you're operating here, I would be uncomfortable allowing a foreign entity to have a connection here.
there's no connection, Senator.
There's no connection?
No, it's
What is NARI then? Can you explain to us what NARI is?
yeah,
Rule is?
yeah.
NARI ba yun? Or NARIC or NARI? NARI.
I will
NARI
defer
an
to,
explanation.
It's
the
a virtu-
technical guy who he knows it.
Professor Mr. Del Mundo of the world.
Good morning po. Yung pong NARI system, yung po yung ating control system na kung ililemanize po natin, ito po yung ginagamit na computer controlled na pwede pong mag-switch on, mag-switch off ng mga circuit breaker ng
Just a
power
moment.
plants.
Let me digest that. Pwede mag-switch on,
Switch
mag-switch off. What does that mean? Can they
Ibig
kill the
sabihin po-
grid?
Ibig ko sabihin,
No, no, be very clear.
Opo.
Don't be fast. Can they kill the grid from China?
remotely po, so kahit saan pong lugar, ito
Yeah,
pwede po
question is
tayong...
answered by a simple question, yes or no?
Yes, sir.
Yes, all right, okay. Go ahead.
So, gumagamit po kasi ito ng communication system. Sa loob po ng NGCP, yung fiber optics po ang ginagamit natin para makontrol ang lahat ng power plant at lahat ng substation. Pwede tayong shutdown, pwede tayong mag-start, mag-on, mag-off. Ngayon po, connected din po ito sa computer, so sa internet, at yun po yung tinatawag nating, kaya po tayo pwedeng maging vulnerable, pwede po tayong mapasukan galing sa labas dahil may connection po tayo sa internet.
The next question is,
Opo.
can you restart it? If they turn it off, can you restart it here?
Opo.
You can?
Opo.
Ah,
Kung
sige.
nagkaroon na po ng control ang isang hacker, for example, kung
Sige.
na-hack na po yung system, napasukan na po yung SCADA system natin, daw, yung hong, at yun po ang exactly nangyari doon sa Ukraine noong 2015. Yung pong system operator na nasa control center, hindi po sila makatrabaho kasi yung mismong computer gumagana mag-isa, sa labas po ang nagpapatakbo.
Sa labas sa China, you mean?
Ang hinala po sa Ukraine ay Russia po ang nag-operate. Nag-shutdown po yun ng
Are you aware of that in Transco, Department of Energy? That there are other sources Are there other entities that can harm the system, that you need to fix the system? You need them? Your dependency? Are you aware of that?
Mr. Chair, that's precisely the reason why we want to conduct an audit, so that
No,
we,
answer the question first.
Yes, we are aware.
You're
that-
aware.
that is
And you're
happening.
concerned. Are you concerned?
Very much
What could be
concerned.
the possible problem kung meron ganon?
Mawalan po tayo ng kuryente, they can switch off the power grid.
Hahanapin niyo ba kung sino nagpatay?
Ganun po ang mangyayari. We have to do manual
Answer
so
my
that...
question. I know you're a lawyer.
Yes, sir.
Hahanapin niyo ba pag may namatay? Anong cost na namatay? Si China ba? Si Russia ba?
Mahirap po talagang hanapin. Kagaya po nitong sa Ukraine, hanggang ngayon, hindi pa nga nalaman kung sino talaga, although they suspect it's Russia.
You're talking about the cyber attack.
Sa Ukraine po.
But I'm talking about a simple case na namatay yung kuryente. Dapat alam mo kung siya ka namatay.
Tama po. Dapat po nalalaman po ng systems operator, which is NGCP.
And do you consider that a vulnerability, Mr. Kusi?
That's why we are trying to
I know
the
you're trying to
system-
have an audit
No.
and I'm with you.
But the vulnerability is always there.
Yeah.
The threat is always there.
And you don't
we
have
must
to add to it.
And we must have the defenses in place.
That's correct.
That's what is important. And that's why we want to have an audit, is to determine if we have the right defensive mechanism to protect our system.
That's correct. And
now,
your principal objective is to protect the country from a
Yes.
situation where we will be totally dependent or totally without control. Wala tayong control. Pag namatay, yun ang sistema nyo. Yun ang rule ninyo. Is that correct?
Yes. That's
Yun
why
ang rule ng
pag
Transco, correct? Yun ang rule ng Energy Regulatory Board, correct? Commission, right? Yun. Why don't you want to be audited then? Why does it take a lot of things? And why do you put firewalls like injunctions, restraining orders? Why? Are you hiding something?
No, Mr. Senator.
Bakit ganon? You should be working together, right?
Yes.
That's correct, Mr. Chairman. We should be working together to protect the interests of the country.
And do you think, in your experience, these people have been working with you well?
Well, I will say that the opposite, Mr.
No,
Chairman.
it's a simple yes or no. Don't.
No.
You're from Lasal. Don't perorate here. I can detect you. See? All right. Yes or no?
No.
No. What about you, Melvin?
No, Mr. Senator.
What about
Actually,
you,
they built a Chinese
Agnes?
wall behind the government and NGCP.
So talagang hindi maganda ang relasyon.
I don't know if there's any
Ano, I
relationship
don't
at
know.
all.
Yes or no?
No, there's no relationship na maganda.
Sige,
Mr.
tanong ka
Chair.
naman. Marunong ka English, di ba?
Yes, sir.
Sige. So, no. Talista nga. Katabi mo, kinakansyohan ka pa, bakit ayaw nyo magkaroon ng magandang relasyon? Anong tinatago nyo?
We're trying to have a good relationship lagi.
Trying.
Yeah, the reason why we're here is,
No, the reason you're here is you've been called.
yes, Senator.
What planet do you come from? You have been called here to explain what is going on. All right? And that's why we have to come up here and ask you questions.
Mr. Chair, may I be allowed to?
It's Attorney Concepcion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Madam Senator, Mr. Senator. Like what Mr. Almeida said earlier, we are not actually against the audit. What we are, sorry, sir? No, sir. What I
Actually,
meant,
be careful when you say something here, Mr. Chairman. They say we're not actually. What is it? A little only? A
we're
little
not
more?
against,
What?
we're not against the audit, Mr.
You're not
Senator.
against the audit. All right.
What we want to make clear is that there are certain parameters for different kinds of audit. Even before the concession agreement was drawn up by the government and NGCP, ERC has been given the power to audit, to oversee, to monitor, and to look into the operations of all stakeholders in the power industry, including NGCP and Transco and all the generation companies. When the concession agreement was drawn up, there were certain limitations to what Transco can do and look into. That is why when it was presented by the good chairman, the power of Transco to inspect the books and the facilities of the National Grid Corporation is limited
to those activities which are outside the purview of the ERC's jurisdiction. And one of ERC's jurisdiction is to monitor compliance with the Philippine Grid Code. And the Philippine Grid Code dictates grid operations standards and parameters. That is where we're coming from, good committee. So what we're saying is that we are going to agree to an audit if the ERC will conduct it. And in fact, they have also admitted that there has been an issuance by ERC for the conduct of that audit, only that it did not push through. So we're making that distinction, Mr. Chair and Senators.
Mr.
Mr.
Chair.
Chairman,
Before we continue, let me acknowledge presence of Senator Pimentel.
Mr. Chairman, I noticed a tremendous groan from the side of the government when it said that the government is limited to certain things. The government gave you this, and part of the consideration for this, and part of your consideration is that dapat this is an entity, an operation that is fraught with national concerns. Security among them the proper use of the line so that the economy would prosper. Would you say that's correct?
I agree, Mr. Chair.
So you're not going to limit them if they think that you're not fulfilling that role?
Mr. Chair, jurisdiction is conferred by law. And we are...
No. You're not in
The
court
ERC's
right now.
jurisdiction.
There is a paramount interest on the part of the government to protect the interests of the country. You mean to tell me I have to go to court to get into you?
No, Mr. Chair. That is
Pinagbili
why...
nyo na sa China, pinagbili nyo na sa Russia yan.
No, Mr.
Hindi kami
Chair.
makakapasok.
That is not the insinuation. In
Oh,
fact,
that
we
is
have worked
that
with...
is the thing that we're getting here.
No, we have in fact worked with the National
Let me hear
Security
what
Council.
I'm sorry, another chair. Sorry, force of habit. Can we hear, Mr. Chairman, can we hear the side of,
Yeah. Go ahead, Sen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me just simplify it. Kasi ilang beses na yata pinost dun sa screen yung Section 703 eh. And ilang beses nang sinabi ni Senator Gatchalian na narito performance examination. But that is a beautiful interpretation of the concession agreement. Of course, if you're the one interpreting it on your side, I will say the same. But sabi ko nga kanina dito, the issue is not about NGCP or Transco. The issue is the public. The issue is the future of our children. Kasi I don't agree. I don't subscribe to that na limited.
I have a question, Mr. Chairman. One last question, just a follow-up. I have a document here that is signed by a Chinese. Can I have that document, please?
Continue with the kind indulgence of Senator Gordon. Senator Risa has also on the same plane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to follow up, mahirap naman kung parang more popish than the Pope ang NGCP. Di po ba? Kung may interpretation ng bahagi ng concession agreement na parang lilimitahan yung regulatory and including inspection powers ng gobyerno, which it is imbued with under the Constitution and the laws proceeding from the Constitution. So yun lang, Mr. Chair, just putting that on record. Kasama ko dun sa narinig ni Sendik na, ganun ba yun? And kapag nagkataong more popish than the Pope, ang National Grid, and then on the other hand, yung ERC naman ay parang nagsa-self-inhibit, hindi nag-a-assert, hindi proactive as the regulator, parang people will get away or entities will get away with doing that, denying government its right to regulate and its right to insist on inspection. Hindi nagiging maganda yung ganyang sitwasyon, Mr. Chair, on the one hand and on the other hand. And I'm referring here NGCP and ERC, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, we are...
Go ahead, Attorney.
We're not trying to be more popish than the Pope, Madam Senator. What we are just trying to assert is that the ERC is part of government. And in fact, they have regulatory powers over us and over the stakeholders in the power industry. That is why we are subjecting ourselves to their powers. It's not uh, it's not trying to arrogate upon ourselves the duty of regulation. In fact, we're even actually recognizing the powers of ERC here.
I'm glad to hear that, Mr. Chairman. But precisely, kapag yung isa is submitting but the other is not exerting, parang mag-iisip ako, is there something going on?
Senator Gordon,
Just a brief interlude here, still on point. You are the Assistant Corporate Secretary, right? You have a President and CEO of NGCP, Attorney Anthony Almeida. For the last few minutes, you've been answering for him.
He's not a lawyer, sir.
Why? Do you have to be a lawyer? I mean,
Sir, you
any
mentioned...
Filipino can speak here.
No, sorry, sir. You mentioned Attorney Anthony Almeida. He's not a lawyer.
No, I mean, because he acts like a lawyer. See? Let me just ask you a simple question. I have here a document that says, I ask those questions because it's pertinent to what I'm about to ask you. Contract for the Luzon substation expansion projects. And I'd like to share this with my confreres here. Another one for the replacement project. I'm sure, you know, Senator Sherwin is a very diligent senator. He does his homework. And I'm happy that he is the chair here. But it says here, when the agreement is signed, ang nakalagay dito, Sian Electric Engineering Company Limited and Sian Electric Engineering Company Limited Philippines branch contractor by Zhu Xiao-an. You know him? Country manager. And then, nakalagay dito, National Grid Corporation of the Philippines, National Grid Corporation of the Philippines by Wen Bo, Chief Technical Officer. And then it only says signed in the presence of Anthony Almeida. That's why I ask you why you're asking. He is the CEO. And yet it is only signed in the presence of Anthony Almeida. As a lawyer, parang umiiwas puso yan. Nandyan lang ako. Iba pumipirma. Foreigner ang pumipirma. And then, when you look at the final agreement, ang nakalagay pa rin, same personalities, and Mr. Almeida signs only signed in the presence of. Is that a cop-out? Is the president of the National Grid Corporation copying out here? I'll show you. When nakalagay dito after the contracts, nakalagay lahat siya na National Grid Corporation of the Philippines by Wen Bo. Sian Electric Company, Electric Engineering by Zhu Xiao-an. Signed in the presence of Anthony Almeida, Chief Administrative Officer. There's something wrong with that. Huh? He was not the president then. Oh, who is, why, nakalagay nga, Chief Admin Officer. Who is the president then? (2011), 8th day of December. Is it Big Boy? Huh?
Henry C. Jr., sir.
Henry C. Jr. Why is he not signing here? These are major contracts.
the kind indulgence of Senator Gordon, I would like to lay the premise first. No?
No, I would like to,
Okay.
as a lawyer, I'd like to know why. Simple question. Why? You don't want to be audited. When you make contracts, walang Pilipino. Ang isa sa mga charges na napag-aralan namin dito, halos meron kayong switch dun sa China, sa NARI. In other words, lahat ng lumalabas sa pinag-aralan namin, parang ang nagpapatakbo, yung 40% ang Chinese. Yung 60% ng Pilipino, wala. Lahat na pumipino sa kontrata. Ito pa. Alright? Hindi ako I'm not picking on you. I just want to be sure. You know, I was the one who investigated, as June Esperano will tell you, in ZTE. The Chinese can play a very powerful violin. Galing magbili niya mga yan. And of course, kung di tayo marunong mag-ingat sa national interest ng Pilipinas, lalamunin tayo niyan. And as I can see, parang wala na kayong say. Saling cut na lang kayo. Would you blame me could you blame us if we say that? You know, and then, pièce de resistance. Gusto nila mag-inspeksyon, umiiwas kayo sa lahat. Anong tinatago ninyo? Anong iniiwasan ninyo? I can see you nodding. Anthony. What is the answer?
I'd check on the documents that you have.
Yeah, you signed it, admin
yes,
officer.
Yes, as
In the
admin
presence
officer.
lang, ha?
Yes, but I can assure this committee that it is the Filipino that runs the national grid. And if ever Mr. Wenbo signed on that document, and I'd like to see it, he was able to get a permit from the DOJ to work here as consultant
No,
or
it
advisor.
doesn't matter to
But
me.
I can reiterate here that us Filipinos are the one in charge of operating. I am from the very start. from
And that is a
2009
legitimate
up to now.
question, don't you think, that
Yeah.
the Department of Energy, Transco, and all the other government entities should ask you a question
Yes.
on how you're running the corporation. That's why they're asking you, you're limiting audit to a very limited highway. It's a wide highway.
Yes.
Dapat tinitingnan niya, nagagawa niyo ba yung pangako niyo na magta-transmit kayo sa lahat? Nabibigyan ba pagkakataon yung mga negosyong kakabit sa inyo? Kasama yan, di ba? Sa concession agreement. Dapat tinaalam natin, nakakakuha ba ng opportunity yung mga Pilipino? Natututuhan ba natin magpatakbo yan o ba talaga magiging palaasa tayo? At kung magkaroon na sisyan, wala na sila rito. Ang sisisihin kayo. I'm just protecting you. Thank you. You're welcome. Di ba?
Senator, again, kind indulgence, Senator Gordon.
Go ahead, go ahead.
One of the bases and safeguards that that is enshrined actually in our Constitution is executive and management should remain with Filipinos, correct? Since 2009, Mr. Almeida, were there any instance where Chinese were in executive and management position in NGCP?
As far as I know.
No,
yeah.
not as far as I know.
No. It's always 60%. Management has always been
So
60%.
management and executive
Yes.
positions are
Yes.
always with Filipinos.
Yes.
I
60%, Senator.
no, not owner, but management.
Yes.
But
Management
management
is
and
100%
executive-
Filipino.
Okay.
Yeah.
I requested for a table of organization in slide 32. No? And in your table of organization, the position of Chief Technical Officer is one position below the Chief Executive Officer. Is that correct?
Yes, Senator.
So that means the Chief Technical Officer is an executive and management position.
Yes, but at that time he was acting as a consultant.
No, for
Yes.
this one.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. In slide 16, and this is the same document that Senator Gordon is holding. In slide 16, a certain Mr. Wenbo, whose position is also the Chief Technical Officer, signed a document in behalf of NGCP. And his designated position there is clearly the Chief Technical Officer. Sabi nyo kanina, walang instance na merong Chinese na nasa executive and management position as prescribed by the Constitution. But in this document, merong isang Wenbo na ang position niya is Chief Technical Officer, and in your table of organization, it's the second highest. No? So can you explain this to the committee? No, because Chief Technical Officer is also connected to what we are talking about now, cybersecurity. Everything there is technical. So this position is very crucial in the assurance of the Filipino people that vulnerabilities are covered and cyber attacks will not happen in our grid. So can you explain this to us?
May I answer, Mr. Chair? At the beginning, when NGCP took over the transmission functions of operating the grid, our Chinese partners, the directors, were given a special visa, and they were given an authority by the DOJ to act as CTO for a certain period. CTO, sir, Chief Technical Officer. So I can only surmise what that document actually shows. But what we're trying to say is that they were given authority by the DOJ to be CTO, a Chief Technical Officer. So they were given special visas.
Mr. Chairman, may I interject, if I may?
Yes, sir.
Kahit ang Secretary of Justice ang nagpirma niyan, that's still questionable. Because when you're entering into a highly technological thing, the least I would expect the government of the Philippines to do is that you have somebody bird-dogging that guy, sinusundan nyo yan para may
Yes, sir.
natututuhan. Sino ang katapat niyang Wenbo na yan, na Pilipino? Meron ba?
Yes, sir. Actually, now, our
Si
Chief Technical
Longbo?
Officer... I'm sorry, sir.
Sino? Wenbo?
No, sir.
Sino?
Right now, our Chief Technical Officer is actually Sunny Di Maliwat. He's a
Sino?
Filipino.
Yeah, pero wala siya eh.
Now, in those documents, sir, at that time, during those periods, when Wenbo was signing as Chief Technical Officer, he actually had a special
Kasi there
visa.
will be a time na tayo magpapatakbo niyan. Hindi naman pwedeng habang buhay sila
Yes, sir.
magpapatakbo dyan.
Yeah.
Eh kung ngayon na, ilang taon na yan, sila pa rin, ay nagdududa na talaga ako. Di ba?
Actually, sir, that's correct. Actually, now the Chinese that are only in NGCP now are directors, and they only have investors visas.
I don't know about that. We'll have to find out sa audit. What do you say? Secretary
Chair.
Cruzzi?
Well, bago po lahat, gusto ko lang pong malaman muna, based sa mga sinabi kanina, they open naman sa audit. Kung sa ngayon ba, are they going to allow ng audit ang Transco and DOE? Para kasi kasagutan sa karamihan tanong na ito, depende kung makikita natin ang audit. We have submitted, nakapag-submit na po kami ng yung audit protocols, no po, nandiyan na yan. Ang kulang natin dito ngayon is that papa-audit na ba sila and they recognize that DOE, kasi kinwestiyon nila yan ang may authority sa kanila to supervise and regulate. Salamat po.
Mr. Chair. Pero sinabi na ng chair na nasa konstitusyon mismo, management and technical positions should always be held by Filipinos. Kahit sa mga ganitong sitwasyon na may participation ng isang foreign country, up to 40%. Tapos nagkaroon ng special visa to act as a technical officer. Alin ang mas mataas at alin ang mas dapat sundin? Ang konstitusyon ba o ang isang special visa?
Madam Chair, the anti-dummy law, in fact, provides exceptions to the exercise of management or executive positions. One of the exceptions is when a foreign national is a technical expert. And in that special visa, it has been actually found that the person to whom that visa is going to be issued is a technical expert on the matter. That is why they were given such a visa.
Fair enough, Mr. Chair, na baka technical expert si Mr. Wen. Pero it still stands to reason na sa isang critical national infrastructure tulad ng national grid natin, na now it will just have to be, if ever subject to review, nung panahong iyon ba, wala bang Pilipino na may kakayahan tulad nung sinasabing meron si Mr. Wen in order to qualify for an exemption? Kasi napakahirap mag-qualify ng exemption sa konstitusyon. Lalo na kung isang special visa lamang. Di hamak na mas mababa yan, several levels down the food chain, kaysa sa ating konstitusyon, Mr. Chair.
Let me just point out another slide, no? Slide 17, wherein, again, Mr. Wenbo made a manpower request form Again, his title is Chief Technical Officer. If you can see, she's exercising executive functions, no, by requesting people. No? And again, it's enshrined in their constitution, simply put, that management and executive function should remain with the Filipinos. And that is the safeguard that became the basis of the franchise. So, kanina sinabi nyo, walang foreigner na nasa executive position, but ang dokumento nagsasabi na meron foreigner, no, ever since you took over. No?
If
So
ever
can you
that-
explain this?
Yes, if
Mr.
ever they're Chinese, Mr. Senator, and for your indulgence also, we have always controlled the management of the company.
This is a violation of the Constitution, Mr. Almeida.
Yes, any document that came out, I supervise it also. We look into it. It's always handed down as up to the top management. So on control, it's always the Filipino that controls the management. If ever there's some signatures that he signed, it also goes through our office, and we monitor it, and then we supervise it as Filipino. And of course, at that time, we needed a technical expert. So we rely on their technical expertise. That's all,
But
Mr.
just
Senator.
flash slide number 2, and this is in the Constitution. No, and it's very clear, all executive and managing officers of such corporation or association must be citizens of the Philippines. Very clear yan. And that is a safeguard. Again, that became the basis why the franchise was issued. Because kampante yung mga senators na ito ay masusundan. Pero hindi ho nasundan. And that's what you're saying, that you may remain control. Again, I would like to believe you as much as possible, but without government exercising its check and balance power, I don't think I can do that. No?
May I have a point of inquiry, Mr. Chairman? Would that constitute ground for cancellation of the franchise? That's a constitutional provision. See, that's very serious. And besides, isn't it incumbent upon us na magturo tayo ng Pilipino? Ang dami-dami UP graduates, dami-dami graduates sa Mapua Institute of Technology, dami natin technological schools, engineering schools. Why can't we not posit them in? Learn how to do it. The Chinese did it in 20 years. Pagmula nang pumasok si Deng Xiaoping, naunahan na lahat ng China. Ba't tayo hindi tayo matuto ng ganyan? Nanangarap pa lang tayo o hindi nyo kaya?
Mr. Chair, regarding the constitutional provision, an enabling law, such as the anti-dummy law, actually provides for exceptions to that. That is what I'm saying. That's what we're saying.
An
That's
enabling
why
law cannot amend the Constitution the last time I heard.
we agree with that also, Mr. Chair.
Hindi pwede yun.
Mr. Chair, we always have to harmonize our interpretation. So, ibig sabihin nito, when a public utility is involved, yan, that's the rule. Yung iba, they can that must have been a non-public utility corporation envisioned in the anti-dummy law exemption, according to attorney. Ganon yun. So, hindi pwedeng just because makahugot ka ng isang provision of law, sabi ito very specific din ito. So, pagbagsak, ito lang, pag bumagsak ang NGCP sa provision na ito, because it is a public utility, or considered as a public utility, then that last phrase, all executive and managing officers of such a corporation must be citizens of the Philippines. Oh, bagsak po dyan. And even if you can cite a law, that law must fail, because law versus constitution, constitution prevails.
We agree with
Yes,
that,
Attorney
Mr.
Concepcion.
Chair. What we're trying to say here is that there are laws that have been passed interpreting the Constitution. One of them is the anti-dummy law. One of them is also the IPIRA. In fact, the IPIRA provided for the bidding of the transmission concession. In that law, in the IPIRA law, it has been provided that the bidding should include, or should the Filipino partners should engage the expertise of a foreign technical partner. In fact, that is not what NGCP did not provide for that, Mr. Chair, Madam Senator. We came into the bid, and the terms of the bid required that there be a foreign technical partner.
You're talking about technical assistance. Iba yung technical assistance kung may pirma. Senior technical officer, nakapirma, tapos yung ating admin officer nakalagay in the presence of. Di tau-tauhan tayo. It violates clearly the Constitution. Must must be citizens of the Philippines. Kahit sabihin mo may enable, yung anti-dummy law is just an extension of the anti-graft law. It is really enhances the anti-graft law. It cannot be seen as enhancing the constitutional provision, which is very clearly stated here, that when it comes to a public utility, to protect the citizens of this country, especially in this matter of transnational national importance, you're going to have Filipinos. Because in its view, one day, we could be taken over. Our utilities can be taken over by, our natural resources can be taken over. Iba yan. Sa ipira yung sinasabi mo na pwede yan. Yan ang ipira lo. Tinignan namin.
Senator Pimentel.
Additional argument pa nga doon. If you keep on insisting about the anti-dummy law, anong year ba yan?
Before yan eh.
Passed in itong presidential decree amending it, passed in 1975. Anong constitution? 1987.
The latter.
I mean, sa law versus constitution, talo na. Sa latest expression of the legislative will, or will of the people pa nga isa, talo pa rin yung argument isa. So, let us not cite the anti-dummy law kasi it's actually not applicable.
Mr. Chair, at saka po, yung requirement sa concession agreement ng foreign partner, that was on the ownership. Kaya nga pumasok ang State Grid Corporation of China to the magnitude of 40%. Na para sa iba sa amin, kailangan pang i-debate yun dahil nga critical national infrastructure ang power grid. Pero malinaw, gaya ng pinopoint out ni Chair, executive and managing officers ay dapat Pilipino. So, ibang usapin po yun.
Yes.
Listening to the discussion, Mr. Chair, it just yung lumakas lang yung position na sinasabi nga ni Secretary Kusina. Why don't we conduct an audit? Meron bang tinatago? And we have to remember, probably you have to put it on record, na yung transmission is a highly regulated business. This is a natural monopoly. So, pag sinabi mong highly regulated, yung interpretation ng contracts in law should be interpreted strictly against them and not liberal. Because I'm hearing interpretation of the lawyer of NGCP which favors them. But we have to remember, again, I will state, if it's a highly regulated and natural monopoly, the statutory construction, it will apply that it should be strictly construed against them, not to favor them.
Chairman, let me level the playing field here a bit. Baka sabihin nyo, pinag-iinitan natin na NGCP. What do you want to find out in that audit? Can you elucidate?
Sir, as to marami sir pero ranging from financial to technical to cyber. Doon sa cyber, on December 2, we sent them a letter. Na-establish kami ng protocol. Yung protocol namin, it cannot be called the capricious because we have a basis on that protocol. Yung protocol na yun, dinase namin sa NERC. Sa NERC yung protocol na yun, na ang sinasabi namin doon, paano mo sinasubject? Because in Northern America, meron silang test na tinatawag, yung Northern American Electric Reliability Council. Because the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission of America, they're heavy on that. Because they recognize na every facilities may vulnerability to attack. Ano yung kailangan? Kailangan may protection. So we sent them a letter on December 2, basing our protocol doon sa kanila, yung cyber system categorization, security management control,
personnel and training, electronic security perimeters, physical security perimeters, system security management, incident reporting and response planning, recovery plans in BS cyber system, configuration change management vulnerability, information protection, physical security. So, binigay namin yon na until now nga walang sagot, and we are happy that NSC was able to somehow do some audit, but that we will discuss in executive session. So, simple lang naman we will end of this. You come out with your technical working group, the government will come out with a technical working group, we audit together. ERC will be there, DOE, Transco, PISAM, not necessarily me, because I'm telling you, hindi nga about me to We come out with experts to audit it. That's it on the cyber. On the financial, nakikita naman natin dito sa mga submission na nila already mentioned it. So, nakita na doon sa financial, hindi na nga, doon na lang yung kung ano yung sinasabit nila, yung binanggit namin mga numero kanina rito, galing po sa NGCP yan. So, madami po, audit of the technical facilities, and even the manpower, para makita natin kung totoo ba na wala bang presence ng mga Chinese doon, kung may Chinese ba, na-check ba to, baka may coronavirus, yung mga ganun ba, no? So, para medyo ano lang, no, Senator? So, yung mga title ng lupa, ma-check natin. Bakit po natin to ginagawa? Ginagawa po natin to kasi 10 years nang umandar yung concession, wala man nangyari pong ganito I remember the spokesperson of NGCP, sinasabi, nung wala pa naman si Atty. Matibag, maganda naman relasyon namin sa Transco Nung dumating si Atty. Matibag, kaya doon lang naman nangyari. Again, I'm telling you, that is it's not about me. It's about...
Mr. Chairman, just to follow his question. You are doing this because we still own this, correct?
Sir, 100%
We're just leasing it to them or letting them operate it until 2058.
2034 po.
2034. So it is in the interest of the country to make sure that the original investment that we put in remains, is enhanced, is doing what it's supposed to do, and that the people there are going to be able to do what they're supposed to do because that is your charter, correct?
Correct po.
And because of that, di kayo dapat harangin. Tama ba yan?
Tama po.
Do you agree with that, Agnes, ERC?
They're covered by their concession agreement.
That's correct. See, the concession agreement only defines the terms within the parties, but never is there any provision that says we are abandoning our claim to the property and that we can always, like a good landlord, check on our property. Is that correct?
That's correct, sir.
Okay, thank you very much.
Let me just go back again, and I want to highlight the importance of the position of the Chief Technical Officer. On slide 32, if you look at the position of the slide of the Chief Technical Officer, kasama ho dyan North Luzon Operations and Maintenance, South Luzon Operations and Maintenance, Visayas Operation and Maintenance, Mindanao Operations and Maintenance. Ito na ho yung pinakabituka ng grid Ito na ho yung pinakabituka ng transmission line ho natin. And then iba po yung nakaposisyon doon sa bituka ng ating transmission line. So the rest of the position, finance, administration, supporting role lang ito But the Chief Technical Officer, if you look at the table of organization, is the key position in operating, maintaining this national grid. Which again, I will connect to the issue of cybersecurity. No? So bakit ho napunta sa isang dayuhan yung pamamalakad at pamamahala ng pinakabituka ng ating transmission line?
That was really an issue that we questioned from the national security point of view. So there was actually an agreement in 2011 among the Professional Regulations Commission, PRC, who is here, DOLE, and the Bureau of Immigration to resolve the issues on visa and on why we should allow a foreigner to be the CTO on that. And their solution, I understand, was to give him a tenure. As I would imagine they would have been starting the SCADA system or in the process of improving it or whatever. I do not know why there would have been no other Filipino qualified. PRC might have a word on that. Board of Electrical Engineering is here.
During that period, Your Honors, the NGCP requested for a special temporary permit. This is within the law. Before any foreigner to practice electrical engineering, or what you call the CTO, we questioned that CTO, and then they have applied for a special temporary permit. But the special temporary permit, before they can be given a visa, the special temporary permit must be issued by the Professional Regulation Commission. We issued them a special temporary permit just for 1 year. It expires after a year. And that was the time, I think if my memory corrects me, serves me right, that was 2015. That was 2015. And also that was the time also that Dole, I think, they gave a visa, a working visa, for these CTOs. But after that, what we do understand is that they went home already. Because part of the STP, the Special Temporary Permit, is an understudy who is a Filipino engineer. So during that period, there was an understudy. I think that guy is Sunny de Maliwat already. He's now a professional electrical engineer. And what we do understand at this point in time is that there are no more CTOs as far as that is up to our knowledge, Your Honors.
I'd like to get a response from NGCP on why a foreigner was appointed to this very critical role. No? He virtually controls the entire grid from Luzon all the way down to Mindanao, operations and maintenance. Can you get an answer from the president of NGCP?
Number one, as far as NGCP is concerned, wala na, Mr. Wenbo has been with us for a long time already. He's not with us anymore.
Was he appointed as Chief Technical
If
Officer
ever he
at one
was-
point?
Yeah, if ever he was appointed Chief Technical Officer, it always supersedes from the office of the Chief Executive Office of all the performance of management that is being done. So it's always the office of the President that works
Simple,
on.
yes or no. Was he appointed as Chief Technical Officer at one point in time?
If he was appointed at
No,
one
not
point.
if.
Yes.
He was appointed
was
as Chief
appointed,
Technical
yes.
Officer.
But he was able to get a visa from.
No, that's beside the
yeah.
point na ho eh. That's beside the point na ho eh. No, that's beside the point. No? You well know the parameters of your franchise. No? Yeah. So in any case, I have a very simple deal for NGCP.
Yeah.
I have a very simple deal, Mr. Ameda. You allow the inspection, or else we will proceed reviewing your franchise because there was clearly a violation of the Constitution. No? I have a very simple deal. And you talk to your board, you talk to your management, because clearly we've established that you violated the Constitution, which is the basis of your franchise.
And in support of that, Mr. Chairman, may I move that we subpoena all the records of the Chinese who are working in this company, because this is a matter of constitutional importance to us, and we should get all the records of any Chinese that has been working in that company. I so move.
The motion of Senator Gordon will be carried, and please submit to us the documents that he requested. They
Throughout
submit
the
to us
last 10 years of operation.
throughout the
up to
last
now.
10 years. Okay, and we
Thank
will.
you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
So before the chair perhaps will rule about the executive session, I'd just like to put on record my appreciation for the hearing of all our resolutions and my privileged speech in order to enforce really faithfulness to the constitutional mandates at sa huli kung bakit yung konstitusyon natin ay nanganak ng isang EPIRA, nanganak ng isang franchise, isang concession agreement para matupad yung pangako na maghatid ng sigurado at ligtas na kuryente sa ating mga kababayan. Safe, dependable, and secure in terms also of the national security aspects. Salamat, Mr. Chair.
Again, we want to move forward and we want to plug the gaps. General Esperon, what are your recommendations? No? We need to move forward. No? This should not happen again. No? Alam na natin na may problema tayo ngayon. Again, to the best of your judgment, no? Without violating any of your national security protocols, how do we move forward? No? How can the legislative branch help you? And
Well,
what are the things that we should do?
Because as Mr. Chair, because as I have said, what we have performed from December to January was a cybersecurity baseline assessment, where we found out that they indeed have the KPMG audit, but it was not submitted to the regulatory agencies. If, or maybe they submitted it, but it was only a summary. So we do not know if they have complied with the recommendations of KPMG. But right now, I can only recommend after our baseline audit that we should now go towards the conduct of BAPT, vulnerability assessment and penetration test. But also, Mr. Chair, we have here a proposed bill, if you may consider it, that we should really be coming up with a new cybersecurity law. Where other countries have already their cybersecurity agencies, it is still with the ICT, but we need to put more strength into the cybersecurity efforts of the government and of the whole country. So it's BAPT plus a recommendation for a new law on cybersecurity. Thank you.
Thank you, General Espron. And on top of that, again, I requested earlier that for your next agenda in the National Security Council to put the issue of the national grid, no, as part of your discussion. We need to get some sort of a formal communication or a formal strategy from the NSC on how to move forward with this. No? Earlier, you mentioned some of the things that we need to do in order to plug the gaps, in order to address the concern on on cybersecurity. But we need to formalize this and to put this in action. And we also need to see timetables. No? So that I strongly suggest to put this as one of the agenda, to put this in your agenda, and to transmit to us the discussion within the NSC. Also, I would like to hear from the Secretary of Energy on how to move forward. No? This is happening. Of course, we want to conduct that inspection, but what are the things that we should do in order for us to make sure that our grids are always reliable, safe, and secure? No?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First thing is that NGCP must allow Transco, DOE, to conduct an audit based on the protocols that we have submitted that covers the entire thing. Not just on the cybersecurity, but also to really have a secured transmission, we need other things like reserve and the system operation. So we want to have an audit that would cover the protocols that we have submitted. And also, as earlier discussed, we cannot have a situation where a franchise is issued and the one that is enjoying the franchise will wag the regulator. We cannot have a situation where the tail will be wagging the dog. So siguro po, yung sa franchise, the future franchise, or even yung mga granted franchise, they have no choice but to really submit themselves to the regulator. It should not be covered by a TRO. Kasi masyado po kaming natatalian, nagiging legal, hindi na TTRO, hindi na kami makakilos po. So I think that would be a good way na siguro future franchise must have this safeguard na hindi pwedeng iwag yung regulator. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any, again, ways forward, Attorney Matibel?
Yeah. Yung recommendation ko po sana for way forward, it's being done in UK right now. There's a proposed legislation in UK that will bring down to maximum 15% the voting rights of foreign investors in enterprises involving critical infrastructure. So I think that will be a good legislation sa atin so that yung worry natin on to control and to the administration will somehow be addressed. So may I respectfully recommend if the Senate can look into that. Yung ownership, it's enshrined in the Constitution, 60-40, but the voting rights probably can be somehow cured or limited. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any comments from the resource persons that we invited? Again, in the light of national security, any comments po? Any statements that you want to make from ERC? Any?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. For ERC, now that funds have been made available to us for 2020, we are committed to, and that we already came up with a TOR. We can now proceed with our procurement for the third party so that we can undertake the audit, Your Honor. But the audit is, of course, what is limited to us as regulators, Your Honor.
Mr. Chair, may I just encourage ERC, maging expansive po kayo. May problema na nga eh. Hindi na po kailangan sabihin na limited kayo sa kung ano-ano kasi higit pa doon, you have that mandate. You have that mandate to act in a more timely fashion, mas proactively dun sa iba't ibang stakeholders. Parang naninibago ako sa ERC na masyadong kimi ba. You have all the mandates, you have all the rights, ma'am, and to the Commission. Gusto ko lang i-affirm yon bilang miyembro ng Senate Committee on Energy. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Senator Hontiveros.
Thank you. Asak, you have anything to say?
Presently, Mr. Chair, good afternoon. To allay any fears at this point for any cybersecurity issues arising from NGCP, we will also request that the NGCP will already allow for their Security Operations Command to already start pushing for backwards sa amin, sa Cybersecurity Bureau, all the threats they have detected thus far, so that the central threat analysis is incumbent upon us kasi. So we can help them in any threat analysis and threat mitigations thereafter.
Let me just again emphasize the statement made by Mr. Almeda that there were 100 cyber attacks that they experienced in the last 2 weeks. This is actually very detected attacks. This is very concerning for us. And the issue here is kayo lang nakakaalam. Our National Security Advisor doesn't have any inkling that these attacks were happening. And in fact, they were tasked to assure us of our national security interest. The DOE doesn't have any inkling, and they are the general supervisors of the energy industry. Even the DICT doesn't have any idea. That's why, again, I have to emphasize on the check and balance role of the government.
Mr. Chair, the Cybersecurity Management Plan actually mandates that all incidents be reported to us through the CERT.
Have they reported?
No, not yet. We've been assessing it. Sorry, we're still assessing the whole
But
situation.
ASEC, have they
and then we will report.
Have they
DIC.
reported?
Not
Not
yet.
yet.
Well, again,
Chair.
there's a
Wala.
violation of that.
Mr. Chair.
Can we ask Mr. Chairman and GCP to submit to us the said attacks?
Through the committee, that's a good suggestion. Secretary Cusi, please submit to the committee documentation of this attacks from day one, no? From 2009 when you commenced operation until now.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Asek.
the Cybersecurity Management Plan mandates that the sectoral head be coursed through the sectoral head. That's DOE po. So, meron po tayong mga sa CIIs po, may mga nakaakibat po ng mga
You
agencies.
submit to
So, dapat-
DOE and then you submit to us.
Dapat
also.
ganun po ang chain pa nga.
Yeah, yeah.
So that they should know actually.
Yeah, they submit to us and then also submit to DOE. And that protocol was
22
kailan pa ba yan?
years na po.
So 2 years na in-implement. Were they informed of this protocol?
I will check first kung there were adequate.
I'm sure, no?
Mr. Chair.
The ICT was, the law creating the ICT was approved less than 2 years ago. So we are in the process of doing it, but this should have been one of the critical moves that we should have done with earnest cybersecurity. That's why we have the national CERT, cybersecurity
Last-
emergency response teams.
Mr. Chair. And in fact, hindi lang 2 years ago na meron tayong ganyang cybersecurity management plan. We had a national cybersecurity plan way back in 2004. So kailangan natin i-connect the dots from that 2004 plan. Ito ngayong 2016 management plan, maybe moving forward dun sa ipopropose ni General Esperon na bill. So this is not the first time na naririnig natin itong mga bagay. And it's also not the first time na alam ng iba't ibang stakeholders, whether from entities like NGCP all the way to ERC, kung ano yung mga accountabilities ng bawat isa, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, just to correct my statement earlier, we already called for a technical working group sa power sector, and they're supposed to have already been invited. as well.
So wala pa kayong ini-issue na directive to the power sector?
It's already been, it's part and parcel already of the cybersecurity management plan.
No, meron ba na issue na directive?
I'll check first, sir. Kung
Meron o wala?
I will check first kung may.
I guess wala dahil hindi mo alam, no? But nevertheless, just submit to us, no? And then I think we're on the right track, no? At least from the standpoint of the National Security Council. And I just want to post slide 22, no? The goals of the 2018 National Security Strategy. In fact, General Esperon, you have identified energy security as one of your goals and to provide strong cyber infrastructure and cybersecurity as one of your goals, no? So, in other words, napag-uusapan na ito within the National Security Council. It's really how to concretize and operationalize ang nagiging kulang ngayon, no? And but in terms of goals and mandates, it's clearly, no, identified in your 2018 National Security Strategy.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, for bringing that up. Because the National Security Strategy may have been there all along, but it was never put on paper. This is the first publication of the National Security Strategy. And so we are having active efforts, very active efforts on achieving energy security as well as on cybersecurity. By the way, Mr. Chair, on cybersecurity, lately we have provided for the creation of technical working groups on very critical industries. One among which are the third telco. We now have a third cybersecurity working group there. The other one is intended exactly for NGCP, and the third one is for the national ID system. For starters, we will go into the other projects as we go on. Thank you.
In fact, Secretary Esperon, in slide 23, he also identified some of the key features of strategic action. There's already a strategic action plan within the cyber infrastructure and cybersecurity goals. And in number 1, if you can see, protect the business and supply chains via the implementation of the National Cybersecurity Plan. So, na-identify na ho no? In fact, it's very clear that one of the goals is to protect businesses and supply chains. You know? So ito po yung na-identify nung 2018 National Security Strategy. Again, what is missing here is how to operationalize and the timetable. And this is where I want to strongly suggest to the NSC to already concretize, i-prioritize ho natin tong cybersecurity because this is clearly a clear and present danger to our grid, no? As demonstrated by other attacks in Ukraine, and marami pa ho yung attacks, no? I just didn't flash it, pero maraming attacks pa ho. No? With that po, any comments from the senators? Senator Pimentel, Senator Risa?
Thank you very much, Chair, and sa lahat naman ng resource persons ng komite for allowing the resolutions at saka yung privilege speech ko rin at yung mga interpellations namin sa DOE budget to bear fruit, at least in ways to move forward in terms of yung energy, yung business side, ng energy, yung financial side, at saka dito sa cybersecurity din. Thank you, Chair.
Again, to remind everyone, to NGCP, please submit to us a documentation of your of the cyber attacks / detection that you mentioned from day one, and then the compliance to the subpoena of Senator Gordon earlier, which please submit to us all records of Chinese workers for NGCP, Chinese workers in NGCP for the past 10 years. Then to NSC, a national security strategy and framework, including timelines. This is in light of the cybersecurity discussions. To DOE also, please submit to us a formal document that will itemize how to ensure security of our grid, no? Reliability and security of our grid. And to DICT, please submit to us everything, please submit to us documents that will pertain to the protection of our information communication system in the light of the transmission grid. Right? The deadline is February 10. No? That's on Monday. And with that, this is only the first part of our discussion. As I mentioned earlier, we will discuss the concession agreement, the franchise, as well as the performance of NGCP in the succeeding hearings. With that, I would like to thank Senator Hontiveros and the others for spearheading this hearing. This hearing is hereby suspended.